Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to WeatherBrains episode number 665. What are we going to do next week when it's 666?
Ooh.
Do we just skip that number and go to the next one? Or I say we just roll with it. Next week will be 666. So this is the pre-show. This is the magical time of the show where we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say outrageous things.
And frantically get ready for the show.
Yes, so we've got we're obviously, for those who are watching live, and well, I guess you can watch the replay on YouTube. But if you're watching live, we are early tonight by almost 2 hours, as we are working on getting a whole bunch of folks on here for a Hurricane Michael special. People that were in the middle of the storm, people that covered the landfall, people that recorded the landfall, people that saw the aftermath. And it's always best to have eyewitnesses because, as you often hear, pictures and video never tell the real story, and they really don't. I've done these for a long, long time, and we're going to get some people that can verbally tell us exactly what's going on down there. And so let me get over here on the Twitter. Bill, you got a party going on in there?
What do you hear, James?
Bunch of people talking.
Oh, well, I've given them to close the door upstairs. The air conditioning went out in our house, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's still over 80 degrees, and all the heat is deposited down here. So hold on a second, and I will rectify that. That's amazing that you could hear that.
Shut up. Yeah,
That's amazing that you could hear
kids
that,
talking.
though. Yeah. All right. I'll be right back.
Pretty
Good
loud.
microphone.
Yeah, so again, we're at 7:44 Eastern, 6:44 Central, and we're going to start the show at the top of the hour. So this, and again, if you've never watched the, I'm going to mute Bill here because we're going to have all kind of racket here. If you've never watched the pre-show, we do three things here. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say outrageous things. And often people say, in fact, had a gentleman in here last week who said the best part of this show, it's the pre-show. He listens to that and then he leaves. So sometimes it is. So again, we are going to have a lot of folks on tonight, rotating them in and out. Thanks to Bill for his work. And we're going to have some of our regular panelists kind of come in and out. And inevitably, let me just say this up front for the audio files, not everybody is going to have the best mic, and probably some people audio might be the best audio, but if you can just bear with us, I promise that you will learn more on this show, perhaps, that you've learned about the hurricane and what it did, the forecasting process, than anything else, because everybody we're going to have on here, they were either directly in it, they covered it, they forecast it. It's going to be a lot of fun here. So, Bill, I had to mute you, man. I'm afraid you're going to say something ugly, screaming at those kids.
Oh, not me. You know better than that. Nothing but
hey, you kids, shut up.
James is in Birmingham Boys Choir. He has a voice that carries.
Yeah, check your mic. I don't think you're
on the right one.
No, I think you got. Sounds like you're on the internal computer mic.
No, let me see. James, is that?
Yeah, that's okay. It just sounds like you're distant.
Well, it's because it's backwards.
Well, that's a show title. I would imagine we're going to have so many show titles here. It's going to be a smorgasbord. So this has been an interesting day for me. So I got up at 2:00 this morning and came to work and did the morning show. Oh boy, I have not done the morning show in 15 years.
You just said that the other day that you hadn't. You jinxed yourself.
I did. So I work the morning shift, and it's very chaotic. I mean, at least on the evening shift, I can run back in the closet here and get some production done. But in that deal, you can't do anything. So I didn't get to write a lot of the stuff I write and do the videos until after the end of the long morning news block. But, they start those things at like 4 a.m.
That's
and they go for
crazy.
They go for 3 hours. And a lot of it is repetitive. It's a whole different mindset from working the night shift, the shift that I've been on for forever. And but see, I sent that whole show down the tubes. I came in with my WeatherBrains hat on. All I didn't have was my soundboard. But so some bonehead locked up the coffee pot here at the TV station this morning, and everybody was I walked in. I said, "This is what's going on here. Everybody's cranky." So I took my camera, went all the way down there, and tried my best to get in. But their consultant's head would totally explode over my performance in the morning show today. But I'm doing a double shift. So the bottom line is I've been here for the most part since 2 a.m. I did go speak to a school today, which I do every day. And then I went to the workout, which almost killed me at midday. So I am just glad to be alive and coherent. But that might change as we go through this.
You better stop doing a good job on these morning shows because they're going to make you work 24 hours a day.
Well, I'm on the morning show as it is, but I'm home when I do that. I mean, I got a green wall at the house, and I can do it from the house. And it's
when
just
you go in there though. You need to tone it down a few notches. You don't need to be going in there with all the innovation and stuff. They'll be running you around like crazy.
No, the consultants will see that. Get that guy off that show. He doesn't fit the mold. He's supposed to be saying tracking every other sentence.
That'll be the day they fire the consultants.
So I got a new song in my fight board. My soundboard. Let's see if anybody recognizes this song here.
Good old Bill Rocket Top. Gonna hear that a few times this coming weekend.
Yeah, this is good time. I just like the song. I mean,
it's a catchy tune. College fight songs are just amazing, though. Really,
like the part in a minute where they go woo. Here it comes. Listen. Here it comes. They're going to go woo.
Well, now you have to play Dixieland Delight, and then we can sing all the ugly words with it when they.
Oh man, bad words. Those bad words are not allowed on this show. For those that don't know, Bill's team, the University of Alabama, they played a song by the band Alabama called Dixieland Delight for several years. And these fans screamed a vulgar profanity as they played that song. And finally, they just stopped it. You can't take your child to that. I mean, so they brought it back, and allegedly they don't cuss anymore. I was not paying attention Saturday, but
I never could understand the words they were saying anyway, so it didn't matter.
Oh, trust me, it was bad. So here's another good one.
While I watch the cannons flashing.
Glenn Cowbell, Galveston.
Yeah, at least Galveston didn't have to deal with this.
So I got your sound cue to Brian Norcross here.
Why was there so much damage from her?
Okay, we got that. I think everything else is okay here. So we're, and again, we're joining, the TV people are going to join the show in progress at 8:30 Central. So we can start whenever we want to. And for those watching, again, we're going to start the show at the top of the hour here in 9 minutes. And they're probably waiting for me to say something outrageous. And this just might be a night when I'll do that because of the lack of sleep here. See, the deal is normally on Mondays, I've had some rest over the weekend, but that didn't really happen very much. So I might say something thoroughly obnoxious here, but we got all kind of important people on the show tonight. Bill,
it's an amazing cast.
Want to run through our cast so people will hang in there with us?
Yeah, at 7 o'clock we're going to have Ginger Z and the chief of the National Weather Service in Tallahassee, Tom Johnstone. All these are WeatherBrains alum. Chris Smith, who's the chief meteorologist at WJHG in Panama City, is confirmed for 7 also. So that's going to be a great leadoff panel for us. Then at 7:30, we'll be joined by Chaser Brandon Clement, who sent back those wonderful videos. I say wonderful, I mean awful videos from the helicopter, I think on Thursday or Friday morning, that are just amazing. Doug Kiesling, who got in the eye. I'm sure all of you seen his images from the eye. He's an old tornado chaser from way back. And Mark Sudduth, of course, who has Hurricane Track, will be joining us at 7:30. And then Brett Adair, who nearly lost his life in the situation by going a little bit too far, is confirmed for 8 o'clock, along with John Humphreys, the chaser from Kentucky, who was up in Panama City but got into Mexico Beach Wednesday night and was there with the before the first responders, and has a lot of amazing stories, and got a drone up first thing Thursday morning before they grounded them. And I think that was the first time we really understood the extent of the devastation, is when we saw those videos from John. So they've all got incredible stories. Those will be amazing. We'll talk to Bill Reed, Phil Klotzbach, and Brian Norcross at 8:30. And then we'll talk about policy and changes for the future with Leslie Chapman Henderson and Mike Romoldi from Flash, and Steve Ellis talking about the National Flood Insurance Program. And of course, we'll wrap up around 9:30, our longest show ever. Because James, this is arguably one of the top 3 memorable events in my life.
Yeah, this I was 13 years old when Camille came in. But do I need to invite these guests I see here in the chat room?
James, I'm going to send them an email invite, but that's a little problematic at times, so I'm sending that right now. Mark Sudduth is messaging me. Are you good over there, James? Okay, I thought I lost you there.
I'm good. Are you good?
Yep, I'm good. People are texting me.
Yeah, this is going to be our. It's going to be quite a bonanza here.
The only one we couldn't get was Ken Graham, and he's tied up, so he'll be on next week.
For those that don't know, Ken is the head of the National Hurricane Center. But no, I was 13 when Camille came through in 1969, which is still today the Gulf Coast hurricane of record. Listening to Nash Roberts on WWL, Clear Channel 870 radio in New Orleans. And I listened all night, and it broke my heart when the sun came up and the skyway went away, and I couldn't hear it anymore. I see Aubrey.
Yay, Aubrey. Come with lots of questions.
I'm missing a mouse. Oh, here it is.
Yeah, your audio is kind of funky. She's muted. Yeah. I'm hearing my
feedback coming down the channels now.
I think that's coming from Tom's.
I'm going to switch sources right now.
Again.
Can you guys hear me?
Okay. Thanks for coming on the show.
Better.
Yeah, I hear you great. Thanks for coming on the show. This we really appreciate it. We wanted to kind of document history before it got directly out. I mean, for some people, it will never leave their mind, but we wanted to get everybody when they're fresh. And again, we'll see if we can get Ginger on here. Of course, for those that don't know, Ginger works the morning shift for ABC. She's on Good Morning America. She was in Mexico Beach when this thing hit. Now, I would say there were some horrifying moments that day. That day was kind of a blur for me in that I was trying to work a regular schedule. I actually went and did a school talk that morning. And in the middle of all that, somewhere I put out, it looks like, Mexico Beach is going to be the worst part. It's going to be in the eastern eye wall. And then Ginger came back with a tweet that said, "I'm here." And that was just horrifying, just horrifying. And I would love to look back at some of the Twitter traffic on that day. We didn't have Twitter for Hurricane Katrina and Ivan. Those were in 2004 and 2005. Didn't have, obviously, Twitter for Camille. Didn't have the internet. Had ham radio. And, let me tell you what, a lot of people laugh at ham radio operators. They are a godsend. When they come into a zone like this, they're basically it. They can communicate to the outside world. What do you do when your phone doesn't work? Verizon's down. AT&T's down. T-Mobile is down. Satellite phones don't work. There's no power. There's no water. The ham radio guys can be absolute heroes in a situation like this. And we had that for Camille. I was not a ham radio operator yet. I got my license in 1970. But again, at that point, I was still listening to the Clear Channel AM radio stations. But obviously, we know there's no mystery about hurricanes anymore. There's just no mystery because you see everything and you hear everything and everything is documented now with the satellite, low orbiting satellite imagery that comes back the next day. You see exactly where barrier islands were compromised and new channels were cut through there. It's just pretty remarkable stuff. So, but I'm looking forward to this. And again, my position, I'm going to be the engineer on duty. And Bill's going to bring in the guests, and I'm going to do my best. And again, for all the audio people, we're going to do our best to keep it clean. But just remember, we've got a series of guests that'll be coming and going tonight. So, but we'll do our best. And we thank all of you for watching. We're going to start here in about 2 minutes. And I have invited Ginger Bill.
Did you invite Chris Smith?
No, I don't see his.
He's right there in the chat.
How's my audio? Is it better?
Much better.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't have my earbuds plugged in. I was getting set up. And excuse me for eating a little dinner.
Yeah, I've got some beef and broccoli made. It's really good.
I have some organic, gluten-free, all-natural, healthy tortellini pesto.
That sounds horrible.
Yeah. And again, for those that don't know, for those of us that work the night shift on television, we just finished our evening newscasts. And this is typically the time where you go on your dinner break and go grab something. So, like I say all the time, if you don't sleep, you got to eat something. So I had some delicious Publix deli turkey.
I love Publix.
And low-fat yogurt. I did mine. We have a little break. We hit World News Tonight from ABC at 5:30 Central. So during that show, I grabbed a bite of lunch. Chris, can you hear us okay?
I absolutely can. Can you hear me okay?
Wow.
Loud and clear. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, we're so amazed to have you here, Chris. That's amazing.
It's not a problem at all.
And you too, Tom. What time did your day start, Tom?
About 6.
Oh, boy.
Wow. Yeah, well, thank you guys for doing this. Let's.
Have you invited Ginger, James? Because
yes, I did. Let me invite her via the Hangout method.
Right.
Sometimes the email they use is a little different.
Yeah, exactly. I sent an email. Did you get in, Chris, via the email?
Yes.
Good. That means it's working. If you strip out everything past the last letter there, James, if everything with that question mark beyond that. All
okay.
right.
And again, Ginger is back in New York. I saw her on. I was working the morning shift, and I saw her on the show. So she is back in New York. So she should be home tonight. And again, we'll probably go ahead and start the show because it's going to be a rotating group of folks in here. I just got an email. Dr. Span, you're invited
That's
to
what I call you.
a free beta of our new radiologist compensation map. You can browse county by county salary averages for radiologists.
Are you thinking
Check
about
out our
becoming a radiologist?
Well, this guy thinks I am one. Wow. I do have an honorary, doctor of laws, but I don't ever use that. All right, so let's get this thing going here. We're going to get the recorders going.
Ready for Fox promo?
Ready for Fox promo.
I will take that off the hook.
They've gone to paging on our phones here too. That's what the beautiful thing is. I don't even know where my phone is. I've not answered my phone in 20 years. All right, here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is WeatherBrains episode number 665, the weekly show all about weather. And this week it is all about Hurricane Michael. And a little different timing here. The show's going to be a little longer than usual, but just bear with us. I promise it's going to be well worth your while to listen to everybody that comes on this show tonight. And for those that are listening or watching live, we're doing this about 90 minutes early, but we needed the time. We wanted to have some extra time and let everybody talk and kind of debrief them and decompress, because there are so many people in the middle of Hurricane Michael that can tell stories that we don't know. We can understand things that we maybe not have heard about. So, Bill Murray, I'm going to flip it to you right away and let you bring in our guests. And Aubrey and I will just kind of chime in when we need to here.
Well, James, it reminds me of, after April 27th, we needed a time just to talk. And, that show that Monday night was very emotional. And, I was telling you when we were in the pre-show, James, this is one of the 3 biggest weather events in my life. And, I feel really attached to it. And I can't even imagine the people that are going to be on the show tonight, how attached they are to it emotionally. So, but it really is an amazing storm.
Yeah. And, I've done some talks on this over the years for professionals in conferences. For most everybody, and it really doesn't matter what you do for a living, for most everybody, you're going to have 1 or 2 days in your whole life, your career, that will define you. It will define who you are. And for a lot of our friends on the Gulf Coast, this was one of their defining days. And it was a day that they will never forget. And they will think about it often, if not once a day for a while, multiple times a day. So, yeah, let's bring them in here and let's debrief them, let them talk and share their experiences. It's going to be a great show.
Yeah. First, I'll welcome Chris Smith, who's the chief meteorologist at WJHG in Panama City. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's amazing that you found time to be here. Are y'all back on the air through your transmitter?
We are back on the air. It's been kind of harrowing. We were off. We got knocked off the air right before landfall, and we're able to get back on the air. Well, we were on air, I guess you could say, via Facebook all afternoon. Literally for probably a day and a half, we did all of our coverage off of my iPhone, and we were able to finally get the generator up and get broadcasting again by the next day. And pretty much since that time, we've been on continuously. And that's just kind of getting the word out. We've had so many challenges that we can get into later with communication and stuff like that, because Verizon doesn't work down here. And it's just been an absolute nightmare for communications and a challenge to get the message out to people.
Well, I know that everyone in your area found that very comforting during all that time that you were on the air. However, you could get to them. I know that was amazing.
Well, you want to be there the whole time, and we had everything set up. We had a generator that it's tested and retested, and everything was fine. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't. So when we lost power, which you're going to, hey, we have the generator, and for whatever reason, the generator failed, and we got knocked off the air, and the folks over at Channel 13 got knocked off the air, and so that was kind of tough dealing with that, knowing that people that could watch us weren't able to help them out, but the Facebook worked, and so Facebook Live it was through the duration of the storm.
Well, we're really glad you're with us tonight, and thank you for giving us 30 minutes, Chris. We're really
absolutely
really honored to have you here. Tom Johnstone is the MIC at the National Weather Service in Tallahassee, which is, of course, the National Weather Service office that's responsible for that part of the Panhandle. Tom, welcome to the show. That we have to stop meeting like this.
I know.
This is
it's been an amazing. I'm literally. You can probably tell this is not my fancy decor behind me. I'm still in a hotel room. I've been here that short amount of time. So I've just been here about 6 weeks, and I can't believe how fast this thing developed.
Well, if you would just let us know anytime you're going to make another move, because I'm afraid insurance rates in that area are going to go through the roof, probably.
Yeah, of course. I was MIC in Corpus Christi when Harvey made landfall. So
we just talked to you a year ago. This is just not good.
Yeah.
So talk about the storm, from your perspective, from a forecasting vantage point, Tom, because we all watched it for a long time. We were talking about this thing, I think, 8-10 days in advance of when it made landfall, anticipating it, and then watching it develop, and just being shocked by the rapid intensity. I guess not shocked, may not be the right word, but appalled by the rapid intensification.
Yeah, we went back and looked. We were talking as long as 2.5 weeks ago about some of the general trends supporting increased tropical activity possible in the Gulf and Western Caribbean during the first 10 days or so of October. I think the thing that shocked me, and of course, working Harvey, we experienced rapid intensification, but the intensification rate was even higher with this. Mm-hmm. And to watch it, especially on landfall morning, to watch it go from a pretty symmetrical eye to just 4 massive eye wall vortices over the course of an hour and a half, it really showed how quickly the wind speeds were increasing, as all of a sudden the eye wall, just the entire character of the hurricane changed. And I think that was the point when we all looked at each other and we're like, wow, I can't believe what we're seeing happening on the scale of every 10 or 15 minutes. the storm was bombing out right up to landfall.
So how did you communicate that, Tom? What was your messaging through your staff?
We were, we had a call about 10 o'clock. We actually had a meteorologist at Panama City at the Emergency Operations Center. We reached out to him in the evening. We reached out to all of our partners overnight. We had a call Tuesday night to pull out all the stops. This was something we even realized Tuesday night it was going to be bad. It was going to be catastrophic. I think it exceeded our worst fears in terms of how strong it got. But in the morning, we were using NWS chat. We were using social media. We were doing briefings every 2 hours. Just maintained open lines of communication with our partners and emergency managers. And we just kept hitting the wording harder and harder. We sent out a tweet with basically a blank image. And the whole point was that this is something we've never seen before. This is uncharted waters for the Panhandle and this part of the Florida coast. Certainly not in the time of modern history. There's been storms back in the 1800s that maybe rivaled this, but it is going to be worse than anything anyone ever experienced or imagined in our lives. And that's the message we kept pushing out.
So Chris, how was it for you and your team? When did you know this thing was going to be a beast?
Well, I came in and started working extra on Sunday. Earlier, I think on Friday when we left, we talked about, it'll be most likely a tropical storm, and everyone was basically excited because they were like, will this get rid of the red tide? And, we've had red tide here as of late. And so it was almost kind of like, this could be a good thing. And then at every turn, okay, now it's not a tropical storm. Maybe it's going to be a category 1. And then, it could reach category 2. And then next thing you know, it's a 3. And I think on Monday, I posted, was it the NAM that kind of showed, that 4 or 5 type thing. And, I threw it out there and I really hesitated doing it because I don't like to be one of those people that kind of throws out these, these models that like point to the worst case scenario, because I don't want to panic people, and I want to have a message that is realistic and not tell people this is going to be a category 5, and then when it's not, they're all looking at me, saying, oh, look, he's just an alarmist, just like everyone else. So I was kind of going along with the message of what the official forecast was, but I did throw it out there. And I think Monday is when kind of things started settling in, that there were too many models on board with the possibility that this thing was going to be much more than, and you never say just a 3, but that this could be a storm of significance. And I remember I texted a friend of mine that night, James knows, you're a new sports person, Jamie. I texted her and I told her, to pray for us because it was going to be a very, very bad day on Wednesday. And, it never stopped. You kept waiting for a eye replacement cycle or something to kind of stem the flow, or the fact that it was getting pulled north, that some shear or some dry air, it always seems like, even with Opal, you got that dry air at the last minute that kind of at least helped take a little bit of the bite out, and it never happened through landfall. And it was it's one of the most sickening things I've seen. And, it's going to stick with me a long time. And, you never really think about it. I know how James was after, April, when you had the big tornado outbreak, and until you go through it, I've never been through something like this, that it's going to wear with me a long time. And I'm going to look at myself and, did I portray the message correctly? Did I put people in danger? It's the emotional part. It's tough.
It is. And, even, working from here, because we had 500,000 page views on just our side on that Wednesday. And, Tuesday night, I remember writing a post, and hesitating before I wrote it, before I posted it, but I said, it's not too late to evacuate, anywhere, from the 30A communities on south, especially, you don't need to be there. And, I felt that with every, molecule of my being. At what point do you find yourself trying to communicate directly to those people that might have stayed too long or stayed behind, Chris?
Yeah, but it's like kind of the old saying is that you run from water and you hide from wind. man, this storm was different. You know, it was you needed to run from the wind as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that goes back to the whole Hurricane Floyd fiasco where, you know, they kind of changed the thought process as to who needs to evacuate with the storm. And, you know, like, okay, we need to just get the people that are at imminent threat from the water because the roads are going to be clogged if we, you know, tell everyone, especially, you know, in Floyd, because it was a parallel storm to the coastline. But, you know, when you see the destruction that occurred on the other side of the bridge from the TV station was hit pretty hard, but we were like on the edge of the eye wall for like maybe 45 minutes, and it was scary. But what the people on the other side of the bridge went through and what you see there will take your breath away. And, you know, we don't know the numbers of how many people that were killed, but then, I mean, that whole side of town has been deforested. It's unbelievable that more people weren't killed, and that, you know, it makes me wonder if I shouldn't have pushed the message that more people needed to get out, you know, because when they did what they did is they evacuated zones A, B, and C, and they have A, B, C, and D. And so D was allowed to stay, but that was all based on, you know, storm surge potential forecast, not necessarily, you know, a category 3 storm or a category 4 storm or a category 5 storm when it comes to the wind. And the wind in this one, other than Mexico Beach and Port St. Joe and down that area, it was the wind, not the surge as much.
Wow, that's an important point. That reminds me of Celia, a storm that hit Corpus Christi in 1970, Tom. I'm sure you had a few references to that last year during Harvey.
Yeah, we did. And you know, speaking of, you know, Celia was a storm with a lot of convective wind streaks, and we're seeing evidence of that now. Just from this, we've not done a full survey around Panama City. We've gotten back to Mariana and areas like there, and we're already seeing evidence of enhanced streaks of damage embedded in a higher wind field. And I think that's something that really, you know, we obviously can't predict that in advance, but you know, the wind speed magnitude of Celia with winds around 160 miles an hour and it being convectively enhanced, I think we're going to realize kind of somewhere close to both those things.
Chris, you brought up models. I'll ask both of you, you know, to critique the models and the job they did during the hurricane. So, Chris, you go.
Well, I mean, as a whole, I think they did okay. I think it was the fact that some of them were so extreme that you almost wanted to discount them. You know, most of them had pretty early on. I mean, the location part of it was really good. I live in South Walton. I live out near Rosemary Beach, basically the west end of Panama City Beach. I was without power for 2 days. That's literally, and I don't have internet at the house. But other than that, my impacts are almost nothing. The damage really occurred from the east end of Panama City Beach over and then points eastward. And that's where we really kind of hit for a while, was basically South Walton all the way to Appalach was kind of where our focus was. And that's where it ended up going. And it wasn't the location that was the problem. It was the intensity and, you know, between the official forecast and then getting out the message of the possibility that this thing could be even bigger and what that would mean for people. I mean, we had people that evacuated Panama City Beach and went into town. Mm-hmm. And they ended up being put in more harm's way than they did if they had stayed out on the beach. I sent my family to Biloxi, and that's where they ended up going because I wanted them, you know, as far away as safely possible. But you know, the models, I mean, I don't know. It was, like I said, the location was fine. They did well, and but the intensity part and, you know, communicating that was concerning. I mean, you know, when I woke up, I went to bed like at 2-something Tuesday night, and my bosses came in at 5-something and woke me up and were asking me about if we needed to evacuate the station, and trying to make those decisions for your coworkers. And that was unlike anything I'll ever remember, just standing there trying to, you know, wake up and look at the latest information to see what had changed. Cause I think that's when it went from a 3 up to 140 at that point. It was surreal. I'll never forget that. And I don't know if 100% I made the right decision, because 5-10 miles isn't that much, and all of a sudden we're in that damage that you're seeing on the other side of the bridge.
Yeah, we were there for Alberto. We went down for Memorial Day and just rode it out on the beach in a hotel, and reported from there. And this is what I was hoping this was going to be, Chris. And, and it just kept getting crazier and crazier. Tom, did any of the models pick up on this drop to 919 millibars? I don't remember seeing any, but it was the fog of battle.
On Monday, someone texted me a picture. I think it was a NAM 3 at a 898 cyclone at landfall. And it was kind of a funny text they were sending me, like haha. But the Hurricane Center was messaging pretty early on potential for more intensification than even was being forecast. And we always brief, prepare for 1 category higher. It's because the rapid intensification is always a possibility. So even as early as Tuesday morning, we're telling people to prepare for a Cat 4. And I think that took a while. There's a lag of expectations in terms of people remember what they saw yesterday or what their brother-in-law told them. And I think it just took a while for people to realize just how dire the situation was. The track forecast, wow. I mean, we had high confidence, I would say 30 hours out, that it was most likely Bay or Gulf counties were going to catch this landfall. It could still go. But we try not to look at models, especially related to the track, because we rely on the Hurricane Center. They're the experts. They have more skill than any model, storm in and storm out. So we just focus on that cone, and that's what we message.
And they did a fantastic job of that track forecast for sure.
Every time they do storm after storm, their track forecasts are getting better and better. It's an amazing amount of skill they have at the Hurricane Center.
Yeah, it really was amazing. So how important, were the balloon launches, the extra flights, the upper level flights and all the things that went into the models? Because it seemed they all came together when those special releases and special flights started happening.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's the special flights and the special launches. I think they'll be able to kind of quantify that after the fact with some data denial analysis. And I'll be curious, but past storms have shown significant improvement from those added releases. So we're happy to do it. It really lets everybody know they're pitching in and contributing to the success of the event. And we noticed that same stability in the model runs after all that extra data was added.
Tom, I imagine your experience in Harvey last year really helped you in this situation. Any takeaways from that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of preparing my staff, it really helped. I mean, we learned a lot of lessons in terms of getting assets pre-positioned, having hotel rooms ahead of time, and hotels that we knew had generator power were on the main line. Made sure we got as many family members as we could out of the city before the storm came in. How we message it, I think we learned a lot with Harvey. But this was a very different storm, and we will always message that every storm is different. And for all the similarities with Harvey, this storm was a completely different beast. And something for me, just on a personal note, I've heard folks share their storm stories. Harvey carried a lot of weight for me. It's seeing what I saw in Rockport and the nearby areas and living through that and seeing our partners lose everything that took a toll on me. And I think seeing Michael deep and rapidly approaching the coast really ripped that Band-Aid off, and really it was immediately back in that that kind of pre-PTSD mode. So a lot of things we learned with Harvey. I think we did a lot of things well because of some lessons that we've learned from past storms, and I couldn't be prouder of my staff and my team. They did amazing work through this entire event.
Well, thank you.
And Babe, Bill, we should mention Ginger has joined us now.
I know. I was about to welcome her. Hey, Ginger, are you back in New York, or where are you?
I'm back in New York. Sorry for the delay on getting in here.
There's no delay. We got 3 hours, Ginger. You just melt into the next segment.
Great.
We're so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. So
I'm happy
try not
to
to keep
be
you up. Try not to keep you up too late tonight.
I was up with the kids, so this is no big deal.
All right. So
Ginger hasn't slept probably like me in a long, long time. So.
Well, we'll just hold you over into the next segment and let you stay till 9 if that's
Bill,
okay.
I was going to say one of the most horrifying moments for me during this whole thing was on the day of the landfall. When I tweeted that Mexico Beach is the worst place, the eastern eye wall. And then Ginger, you tweeted, "I'm here." That was horrifying, just horrifying. So to tell us in words, I know that pictures don't do it justice. Video doesn't do it justice. Kind of go through that experience for you that day. Why did you select Mexico Beach, and what was it like?
Yeah. So originally, when I was watching the storm from the beginning, I thought that we would cover it in Apalachicola. That was my initial kind of ask, is that we would go to Apalachicola and by basically fly into Tallahassee, kind of see how the next 12 hours developed. This is on the day before, just after GMA, get down there. And when we got down to Apalachicola, our group had gotten a hotel, but it was the place. It was a Best Western in Apalachicola, and it was surrounded by a lot of trees. And the way that we had flipped the rooms somehow with the cruise, a lot of us ended up with first floor rooms, and I just said that doesn't work. That's not a place I'd like to be when you're going to have a storm surge possibly of 9 to 13 feet. So I said that place is not going to work. Let's look around, and we looked around for more places that night, and there weren't a lot. A lot of the other crews had the entire places taken, and I think that we would have been able to go in a second floor. I don't know how that Best Western looks today because I didn't go back and check, but I still just didn't feel like, number one, we weren't going to be necessarily safe, and number two, we weren't going to be able to make television there. It just didn't make any sense. So I thought, well, we have two choices. We can either go to Tallahassee and just go back and really be away from the storm, or we can go up the coast and see if there's anything in Port St. Joe. So we went to Port St. Joe, didn't find anything, and then we got up to Mexico Beach, and I saw those large condo buildings. My crew and I were kind of just looking around, and we saw a guy working on boarding things up, and he said, well, let me call my manager of our condos here and see if she can do anything. And at that point, when she got there, she said, a couple of my residents are out, but they said anybody can stay within these walls. It's hurricane proof glass, and we've got, the building is made out of, I always say this wrong, it's concrete, right? It's not cement. It's made of that, and it's got these really deep, rebar that it's built into steel. She had all of the hurricane talk about the building, and I said, okay. To me, that was at that point, our best choice. And I completely knew that we were in the peak of where the surge would be. But I really felt like if we were going to do it, I felt better there than I did on a first floor in Apalachicola. I just, water can do a lot of things. And I've seen that in all of the storms I've covered. I haven't been there for it until this one. So we started the morning at GMA watching the ocean just look very angry, as it does. And then I said, there's no way we're outside past 9 a.m. We went inside. We had a broadcast to do for our special report. And then everything started very quickly, as everyone I'm sure has described. The wind, all of the debris started flying. We didn't broadcast outside at all after 9 a.m. We just stayed inside those cement walls, and inside we shut the door and kept it as it is. And we didn't need more than that, because as soon as that wind shifted, it went from winds, which are impressive, and I feel like I had seen winds to that degree in some ways in my time of covering storms. But then the surge came in, and it shifted so quickly. Within 2 minutes, the entire road was covered in water. My producer says, Ginger, it's like a river down there. And I look after I just got off TV, and I see the house across from us ripped from its foundation, twisted, and bobbing down the road. And there was that brief moment where I thought, I can't believe this is happening, because I made a 3D graphic 4 years ago after Hurricane Sandy. It was 4 years ago, whatever it was, where I was making the graphic based directly on what a woman told me about her experience in Sandy, about how her home came off of its foundation, twisted, and bobbed down the street until it shredded, and she lost her husband and her daughter. And it was a really difficult story for me to tell, but it was also going by this woman's description. I was watching my 3D graphic come to life in front of me. And that was the most, stunning thing to see. And that's some of the clips you might have seen where I was it definitely caught my breath and took my breath away. It was a moment of, I was never afraid for my life or for my crew's life. I really felt we were 30 plus feet up. I mean, if the surge got to 30 feet, we had rooms on the fourth, which was the fifth floor, and also the third, which is called the second floor. We were interior, so we were away from any any of the debris that could be flying. We were so fortunate that all of the building code that this building was made to not only withstood everything, not one glass shattered, not one door shattered. We watched those buildings bob down the street and they got shredded on our building. I mean, it was, I will never forget it. It was definitely a moment of kind of like running the numbers in my head and watching the waves, probably 15 feet below us lap at that second floor and thinking, wow, the power of water is one thing to forecast it. It's one thing to, like when I covered Katrina from Gulfport, I showed up that right after, very raw moments after, but still I didn't see the water. This was the first time I had seen surge to this level, and it was even bigger and more powerful. I've always respected it, but I respect it even more now. So that's kind of how the day went. Like I said, I mean, we didn't lose a shingle on. I don't know that there was shingles because it was all cement with stucco on the outside. This building was a fortress. When we came out, I will say that I was not that I mean, I saw a house bobbing in the road. I knew there was going to be terrible damage, but to see how well I think there are about 3 or 4 of these large, really well built condo buildings. These were standing and nothing else is fascinating, to see how much, building code can mean in a situation like this. So that's kind of the long story. Sorry, but it's kind of that debrief I keep saying over and over to people. And it's funny because one of my producers that was with me, he has storm chased with me before, and we've actually been away from each other for a while. He's been on the he was on the campaign, and then he's pretty much followed Trump with Tom Yamas. And I had specifically asked to be back with him, and he looks at me after everything kind of settles down. And he said, "Whoa."
Mm-hmm.
That made politics look pretty calm. So I think that tells everybody.
Did y'all lose all your vehicles, Ginger, and everything that was not in the condo with you?
So the vehicles we had left, the satellite truck we sent away, knowing that there would be surge. And then we were honestly, I thought our photographer had moved their car but I wasn't paying attention when we were setting up for our special report and such, because they were gone for an hour. We had all kind of taken a break. And my last understanding was they had moved their car. So after all of this goes down, the photographer says, "Well, my car's gone." And I'm thinking, I didn't know your car was here. Oh no. So yes, we did lose the vehicle. But not, I don't want it to sound like I didn't think that we wouldn't lose a vehicle if it was underneath the building or anywhere in the vicinity, because I think again, 9 to 13 feet in an initial, and then I think they bumped it a little bit. And we were really at the apex of where that right eye wall would be spending its most time. And that amount of time is how you push more water. And I think it's again, one thing to forecast it, another to see it. Yeah. And I think the next step for me is, I think that we can do, and I don't know why, and maybe you guys can inform me, but I talked to my husband a lot about this when I got back. The people that I met, a couple of them that swam with life preservers on because they live in a mobile home and weren't able to get out because they don't have the funds, they don't have any money, they don't have a vehicle. I wonder why, and maybe this is something that, again, you could tell me, but why we couldn't go in and help people, like a rescue before a rescue, say the night before, and do a lot more pre-work, not just for ourselves, but for other people, and say, hey, listen, I know it's scary to leave, but you can take your pets, you can take your medications. We've got 12 hours before this. I'm telling you, I've seen it with my eyes. Here's some video, here's some pictures. This is what water can do. We're going to put a GoPro on your house so nobody can loot it, because I know that's always something I've learned so much about the psychology of why people don't leave. Make it as easy as possible for these folks to go. And then that's my story. I take them to that inland area, even though a lot of the inland areas got terribly, impacted by the winds as well. But taking them to a shelter that is safe, and then giving people that opportunity to survive. I think that's my next kind of goal in broadcast, is to say, we know where the surge is going to be. We know where the wind is going to be. We've seen it. I've seen it. I don't know that I need to see that again. Let's do it. Let's make this a better place. And I don't know who it is that I can partner with, but I'm going to talk to all of the people at ABC tomorrow, and hopefully we can make this happen for a future storm.
That's an important message. Christy, you need to go. I know you've had a long day and a long week. Can you stick around, or do you want to head on out?
I can stick around for probably a few more minutes. We're still in 24/7 type coverage right now, so I have someone kind of taking my shift. I kind of started off on my own. We were basically like, okay, we're going out to do stuff, and you and Ryan, you're in charge of posting stuff to the social media and stuff like that. And Ryan and I just kind of looked at one another and decided, you know what? Ryan's my morning weather guy here, and we said, you know what? We need to be on the air. And so I was like, even if we're sitting there posting stuff on social media and that's all people see, and then we talk for a while and then we take 5 minutes and post stuff, then that's just what they're going to get, and it's better than nothing. And so and since that time, it's been pretty much just a real rotation of us constantly on air, trying to get stories back and putting them on air. Literally at one point, we're like holding up laptops to the camera in the studio, and that's how we were displaying video and stories. Apple TV, I mean, all sorts of very rudimentary broadcast stuff. And we're now just kind of, if you look here in the studio, you can see kind of getting back to a little bit of a sense of normalcy.
So Chris, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jen. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Chris, what has a lot of your stories been throughout the day?
So much of it has been, and I kind of felt like we were isolated, even though we're here. We didn't have a whole lot of communication. So it was difficult to know like what you were reporting or CNN or the Weather Channel. We didn't have access to hardly anything at all. And we were just kind of trying to figure it out on our own. And in a way, I felt like we were more with the lack of communication, because we didn't have cell service or anything, that we knew less than anyone. When in reality, you would think we would know more than anyone, because it's our home market. The communication thing has just been a disaster, and it's still an issue now. And I really think it's hampered the ability, because so many of the emergency, whether it's emergency management, sheriff's office, they're all on Verizon, and Verizon still doesn't work on day 6.
Tom, you probably need to go too. Give us your biggest takeaway or something that we don't know.
Well, I'm going to go back to a point Ginger made. We reached out on Friday to social scientists at CAPS at the University of Alabama, and we're going to try to get them in when it's safe to do so, and when the time is right, to do a survey of folks to find out. They answer some of those questions about why they stayed, what messaging they heard. But there's the other significant issue is some people just can't leave. I think that's a challenge that all of us in the community face. Is some people either don't have the means. They don't have the way to get out. They don't have the money to get out. In Rockport, there was dozens of drug addicts that were left behind, and they just all of a sudden they showed up on the street. They had no idea they literally did not know what was happening outside. There's huge numbers of folks that need additional help, and as a community, I think we can do a lot more. So I'm glad to hear that. For us, this was a storm that wasn't supposed to happen on the Panhandle side of Florida. You look back historically. And we were using words leading up to this event, especially starting Monday night into Tuesday: historic, catastrophic, never happened before. Really trying to get that message across to people. And we know that a lot of people left, and we know that a lot of people left at the last minute when they got scared because of coverage from all of our media partners, from the messages our emergency managers were putting out in our messaging. So the system worked, but there's going to be lots of lessons learned from this event. And we have survey teams in there all day tomorrow, all day Wednesday. I'm really afraid what we're going to see. I think for a lot of my staff that's going to be there, they've never seen anything like they're going to see when they get into Bay and Gulf counties tomorrow. So just praying for everybody.
So Tom, thank you for joining us. I know you probably need to get out of here. We'll let you get away. And
I'll hang on just for a minute or two, but then I probably will drop off. So thank you, Bill.
Thank you for being here. Chris, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, in a weird way, though, it could not have hit a better place, because the eye went over Tyndall Air Force Base. And when if Tyndall wasn't there and you actually had development there, and you had the numbers of people that decided in Mexico Beach to ride it out and not leave, the loss of life from the storm surge would have been unimaginable. But when you're in the military and someone tells you to leave, you don't have the option to go ahead and just ride it out and stick it around. So in a weird way, that base being there saved a lot of lives. But again, inland areas, I don't think we're prepared. And I don't think that I even understood what the damage was going to be inland as a result of the wind. The surge is not a surprise. What happened in Mexico Beach, not a surprise at all. What is a surprise is what it looks like inland, Bay County, Calhoun County, Gulf, all the way up to Jackson County, into Southwest Georgia. My in-laws near Bainbridge, Georgia, are going to be without power for like 30 more days as a result of this storm.
Yeah, there was a wind gust of 115 miles an hour in Southwest Georgia. And, you know, we extended, there was an extreme wind warning for Georgia from a landfall in the Florida Panhandle. That really tells you a lot about how much staying power that eye wall had, that it was able to produce extreme winds into Georgia.
I mean, the day before, right? The day before we were running the RPM, and even Dothan had a gust, and I don't know what they ended up with because I haven't been able to go over everything, but we had Dothan in the 75 to 100 range. Like, that's incredible to think that far inland. And so I agree that even though I saw it, to be honest, even though I saw it on those models the night before, I don't know that I would have understood that either. I think you're exactly right.
Hey, but before we lose Chris and Tom and Ginger, I wanted to ask each of them, how has this changed your life? Let's start with Ginger.
I really think that it's changed my life. Again, every storm that I've covered from Katrina on. Katrina was the one that kind of broke me, I would say. And this one reminded me so much of that. And I've become such a better human, I think, in the time that I've grown up so much that I think that now I see that there's such purpose and such storytelling I can do going forward. And that in my warning, I think in the warning, everyone on this panel has done such an incredible job of getting a message across. I think it really becomes social science so much from this point forward. And it's about the psychology of weather. And that's the part that I think will change for me on a very personal level. My husband was pissed. and he it doesn't, of course, I like to say I'm still me. I'm still a total science nerd. And there were moments that I was just eating it all up, but the human part, and yes, being a wife and a mother of 2 young boys, I want them to be proud of the work I do, not scared of the work I do. So I think that's the thing I'm going to work on. And I think we just need technology. If I can throw a camera on every single person's house in Mexico Beach and then get them out of there, that's my goal. I want to put some sort of, group together that does that. So that's how it's changed me for now.
I bet Mark Sudduth could help you do that.
Mark, we'll bring him in just a second. Let's by the way, Chris, do you know some guy named Jeremy Pate, by the way?
Oh gosh, he's around here. He's around here somewhere. Oh yeah, he rolled back in here today.
Yeah, I heard a rumor that he was being stationed down there for a while to kind of help out. So for those that don't know, Jeremy's wife, Ashley, worked with us for years and years here, and just a sweet family. And Jeremy understands the station. He's been there for a long time, so I'm sure he's a good guy to have back. But again, Chris, your final thoughts. How's it changed you as a meteorologist?
I mean, it's the worst thing I've ever gone through in my life. I've been doing this 22 years now, and you have a little tornado outbreak here or there, or a little brush with the tropical system. But I mean, I've been here since 2009. We really haven't seen squat. I mean, you get a little glancing blow, this or that, but nothing big. And then for this to be it, and the enormity of having to make decisions as to whether you stay at the station or not, where to stage the crews, and remembering that, I've been doing this 20 some years, but this is a starter market. And you're sending out reporters and putting them in situations, and they end up seeing things that, it's tough on them. And seeing the, did I lose you?
No,
it's okay. Your audio is
fine.
I'm in low power mode apparently. So, but the emotion of having to make those decisions, and then we couldn't get our reporter out of Gulf County for days. We were going to have to helicopter that person out. I mean, she was I mean, you see the emotion on most of them are girls, and most of their eyes when you see them when they come back, and it's been really, really tough. And myself, I'm not emotional really at all. And like, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've cried just when you see the kids when they come back with their stories and they tell you, and then you see the images, and then you think back as to, you know, the words that you used on air to get that message across. And, you know, in Bay County, they estimated less than half the people evacuated that should have evacuated, let alone we should have evacuated maybe more because that wind threat ended up being so high. It's you know, it's when I come down from the crash of working 24/7, I'm glad my wife is understanding and she's supportive.
Tom, how about you?
Yeah, you know, I discovered weather as a young kid in Cincinnati, April 3rd, 1974, probably a day you remember. James. And it was really seeing the power of Mother Nature and seeing all that. I was fascinated and kind of developed a love of weather and an excitement about weather. And I think that's been beat out of me by Harvey and by Michael. I think I look at the models now and with dread as opposed to kind of an excitement of what could happen. I hate what I've seen what's happened to people. And people that I know and care about losing everything and losing friends and losing their lives. It's beaten a lot of the passion I have for the enjoyment of weather. I'm as passionate as ever about warning people about weather and getting them to take the actions they need to take. But it's changed me in that regard. And on a scientific note, I just want to say that I think that what Michael really showed us is we're going to see, I think, really great value for all the extra data that was gathered as it respects to the atmosphere. But I think where the next step really lies is us pouring that same amount of effort into the ocean. And I think that we really need to understand in real time the energy content of the ocean beyond just seeing loop currents and other things. We really need to understand the amount of energy that's contained in that entire ocean column. And I think that will be the next real improvement in terms of anticipating these rapid intensifications. We got a long way to go, and certainly we want to be part of the solution in that regard. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for being here. We appreciate everything you do, and good luck going forward. We'll have you back in a few weeks or months when everything settles down and talk longer. All right, Ginger, we got you here. Let me introduce Doug Kiesling. Doug will get you unmuted there. Doug, amazing photos you sent from the eye. It's amazing to have you here tonight. Oops, no sound coming out.
We got to get Doug unmuted. Doug, unmute.
Unmute thyself, Doug.
Unmute.
There we go.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, like the
Loud
Verizon
and clear.
People. Yeah, exactly. One of the things I was talking with a friend of mine is later this week I will be taking the studying courses for the ham radio because there's so much I had to report to just sitting there basically a mile just the northwest of where Ginger was holed up at the condo. And I had this couple that came up that was injured, and there was no way to get help out. I mean, I was texting her producers. I was texting some people at the Weather Channel trying to get the message out. And it's just nothing they can do. So, wow, what an insane event. This is Hurricane Katrina mixed with Hurricane Charlie for the wind field. This, that's all I can say. It's just, if this doesn't get upgraded to a Cat 5, I don't know what it will take to upgrade it. When I saw the mangled mess of that Florida State University tower, when I finally was able to get out of there, that thing's 6,000 pounds and is anchored to the ground, and it was tossed probably about 30 yards from where I saw the position when I drove in on 98. It's just incredible, the power. I did talk to one guy today who lived down there. Actually, their beach house was down there. And his house was the house that the couple that I helped get into the house, that their whole place was disturbed. It was destroyed. It blew apart around them. They had to crawl out through the surge and the debris. She was seriously injured. And what happened was they were basically just waiting for help. And no help was showing up. And they want me to try to evacuate them. I couldn't get out of there. And so finally, I was going to break into someone's condo, and I went to the door, and by the grace of God, it was open. And I went cleared a path, took the debris with the nails and everything. The wind's still gusting around 50 at this time when the surge just finally let down. And so I made a path for them to get into this place. They left a note to the guy who owned it. He called me up today and just wanted to thank me for letting them in there. And the only help that I saw for the first 12 hours of when I went in there was these guys from the flip-flop flotilla of the Cajun Navy that they reported they got them out of there that following morning, and they didn't see anybody come in yet.
That's Doug. Those were the only two that I saw as well. They were making their way through the whole town, so essentially volunteers. And I would say, because I don't know if anyone's mentioned that yet, but I think that's good that you brought it up. I'm having a hard time. So I don't know how much of that stretch, if it was just Mexico Beach or if it was all of Coastal Bay County that was mandatory evacuations, but I don't know how much that played into the not response, because after the winds died down, you usually start hearing wellness checks and you usually start to see people show up. We saw nothing except for those two guys, the two locals who had flashlights walking around, just seeing if anybody needed help. And they got that helicopter for that woman. Now I know who the woman was. And they got her out there.
When I saw them, I said, "Hey, let me get your story real quick so I can get this out so I can let your relatives know that you're alive."
Yeah. And I've been texting with Christian, one of those two guys, even today, because he didn't even realize that I was on Good Morning America. And he thought, oh, I didn't realize. I said, that's fine. Because, one of only a couple of people. But I thought that was really interesting. And even the next morning, we walked out and we waited until it was complete day and until we heard any action. And there was one guy, a local, who had hot wired a bulldozer, and he was bulldozing. His name was Kyle. He goes by Bud. He was bulldozing in the lanes of 98 to try to get it clear. We started hiking because it was then daytime and completely, you could see everything. And we didn't see any official until about 10 a.m.
And one of the things I noticed, you didn't go out after the storm and wander around, did you?
No,
because one of the things I noticed that almost got me was, since it's a fishing town, there was a ton of that high strength deep sea fishing line all over the place, and hooks and everything else, along with all the damage and debris that was.
There was. Everywhere. I did run over that, but we did see that. We just avoided it as if it was some sort of line. But you're right, that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
We got to get Mark Suddath in here. Mark, are you able to unmute? Can we hear you?
Unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Now, Mark, where were you during the storm?
Physically, I was in Panama City at the Hampton Inn. Metaphysically, through this right here, I was in Mexico Beach at point blank range, right across from the Toucan restaurant. Had a live camera set up, and then below that, a case with this GoPro inside of it, recording everything. And so I was able to be in two places at once. The story, once it died down enough, I wanted to get back to Mexico Beach to get the camera boxes, especially the GoPro, knowing that it recorded everything. So a fellow named Brent, who came up from the Virgin Islands to help me out, he and I drove from Panama City all the way into the first debris pile, and it had just gotten dark. We passed that wind tower that Doug mentioned, and we were in complete awe of that. We got to this spot, and there was about 15 people kind of milling around in the dark, and we met another gentleman here from Wilmington. His name is Tony. The three of us decided we would hike all the way down, whatever it is, 2 miles or so, to where Toucans used to be, and try to attempt to get the boxes back. To me, it was like, even though the cases are yellow, it felt like trying to retrieve black boxes from an airplane crash. It was very important. So we had plenty of water, we had tools, we had flashlights, and we had some energy. So off we went. Within the first quarter mile, we ran into an 85-year-old man that was stumbling around in the pitch dark, murmuring to himself, whatever. We gave him some water, gave him one of our flashlights, told him to just sit still, don't go anywhere else. We couldn't bring him with us, so sit down here and we'll be back. And he said, okay. And we kept on going, and we saw in the distance this glowing something. I was like, oh, that's a fire in the distance. And we kept going and going. We passed a couple of people that lived there, and they gave us some advice about a bridge that had been washed out very close to where Toucans was. And the GoPro was on a light pole at the Exxon and subway station across the street from Toucans. So we kept going. We crossed this bridge that was washed out. Felt like we were on some episode of Survivor or something. It was crazy. And yet we were very careful in what we did, very methodical. Got to the gas station, and the camera was still there, and it was still recording when we walked up. And we plucked everything off, and I said to Tony and Brent, let's leave the GoPro running. Let's don't stop it, okay? And we still got to go back. You never know what we're going to see. On the way back, that's exactly what happened. We saw a helicopter, and it kept circling, and it parked over this condo area right next to the beach. And we were watching and aiming the camera box up to it with the GoPro running. And this guy looked like Captain America, comes out of the helicopter, lands on the destroyed beach, and runs into this just demolished first couple of floors of this condo. And we went in there after him and said, can we help you? And he said he was trying to find a 92-year-old woman, and he tried to get up the stairs. They were all gone. So Tony bends over and lets Captain America climb up his back into this second floor. And we just waited, and it was like a maze, and everything was destroyed. And after about 30 minutes of trying, they bring this woman down, and they hand the woman down to myself and Tony. Brent was up there. We helped her to the helicopter, and then this girl comes down. Her name is Kristen. She's 32, and that was the granddaughter, I do believe. And they all get lifted up into the helicopter, and off into the dark they go. And I thought, is this happening? I kept waiting for Steven Spielberg to yell, cut! And that's a good take. I mean, it was beyond anything I have ever experienced. There was a point where we were exhausted, and there was nobody out, not a single noise. We did see that there was a big fire, by the way, about a block to the east of where we picked up the GoPro camera. A couple of houses had just burned to the ground uncontrolled. But we were very tired, and so at one point, we laid on our backs in the middle of Highway 90, the edge of it gone, right, and just non-existent. And we slept for about 30 minutes looking up at the Milky Way, as bright as it could possibly be. We got about an hour total, maybe, of rest, and then we kept going. We saw the rescue, etc. And then we let Tony go back to his condo that he was staying in, and we went and slept in the one of my two vehicles that I've got. And the next morning, wanted to get some aerial video, and a couple of Army guys came over around an hour before dawn to check on us, see how we were doing. And we were doing great because we came prepared with water and everything we needed. And the sun came up, and it was one of the most remarkable experiences that I've ever had. And then we flew our quadcopter and got some video, a lot of it just a few feet above everything. I knew there was going to be plenty of high altitude, so to speak, to show people the scope of the damage. I wanted to get that shot like a dolly shot right over everything for as far as we could go, and really show you up close, but about 5 feet above it, what it looks like. That'll really help in the learning process in the future, I thought. And then we left and got back to the hotel and packed things up and looked at the video once we got up to Montgomery, Alabama. And if you haven't seen it on YouTube, I'm telling you what, it is some of the most remarkable hurricane video that I have ever seen. And I know, you're biased, Mark, but there is so much science in that video because it's perfectly still. It was a little shaky from time to time, but it's a single shot for the entire event from start to finish, all the way to sunset and all the way to when we came back and all the action that happened after that. And I've enhanced it and played with it a little bit. There's a lot to learn from it. There is storm surge being jet propelled into Mexico Beach, not these waves that come up one after the other. Doug, you remember seeing that in some of the
exactly
hurricanes.
what I was seeing. And when I was driving around in there on the west side, I was seeing the surge, and when it started coming in, it was just like you were behind a jet engine that was basically trying to do a takeoff. It wasn't just a surge just slowly coming in. It was just forced in at 150 miles an hour.
Yeah, it was the damnedest thing that I've ever seen. We collected wind data and pressure data from the Hathaway Bridge. We mounted a RM Young weather system on the bridge there between Panama City Beach. So we have high density observations every minute from the night before all the way until Thursday mid-morning. The data from the cameras. And then we had other live cameras around the area and another GoPro system over at East Point that the National Weather Service Tallahassee is helping to recover for us. That'll also contain more secrets from what Hurricane Michael did.
Now, Ginger, I know you probably have to go at some point. We're gonna lose you here. And thank you for all this time. But what struck me was what you alluded to. The lack of first responders, and is that a factor of you shouldn't have been there in the first place? That's one argument that could be made. We're the greatest country on the earth, and how come we can't get anybody in there to help right after it happens? What's the answer?
That I don't know the answer to that, but that's what it certainly felt like. And it felt different because, again, I'll bring back that story of the woman in Sandy. The reason she survived was because they found her right after the surge went down. She was already going into, I believe it's called hyperthermic. I always get that backed up, but shock. And she always says she credits the first responders because she wouldn't have made it. When the water temperature, it doesn't matter if it's 80 or 85, when you're below what you're supposed to be for a long period of time and you're in water, you're not going to survive. And so I kept thinking, if there is anyone who made it through or who got into that storm surge, they're not going to make it without people helping, without people getting to them. I kept thinking, where's that woman? And we called around our building just to make sure, just to see if there was anyone in the debris piles that were close to us. But the sun went down really quickly, and we didn't want to take any chances of being out and trying to be first responders because that's not what we are. And that was very hard. That silence overnight, aside from the one helicopter that everyone's describing and the two volunteers. And actually, I don't think I heard Mark and the crew, except for I did hear your quadcopter the next morning.
Might have been Val Casters as well. He was there flying.
Actually, it was Bon Caster's brother.
Bon.
Oh, okay. Well, the silence
Saw the truck.
was the hardest part, I would say. And I think every time I do these storms, I have this unique perspective of being there and then telling their stories. And that man who had hot wired the bulldozer, I think you immediately saw kind of that same, he had a mix of overtired rage and upset that nobody else was helping and he couldn't get his town clear. The psychology of what happens to people after a disaster is usually they go through those different forms of shock, and then they go into the, there's fear and shock, and then they go into sadness and sometimes anger, and everybody responds at different rates, but they usually go through all of those different feelings. I forgot there's a model of psychology that goes into it. But encountering people in those different states is fascinating. And I know that it impacts me personally, but all I do is today, I have to say the one thing that bothered me the most out of everything is we covered it and Rob was still down there and we had, we definitely had the stories front and center. I know they get forgotten really easily, but I think because of the gravity of what I saw again, I can't tell you the number of people that came up to me and I thought, well, they're going to come up to me and say, wow, what an event. Oh my gosh, because I'm so involved in it. No, they said, I like your romper, or they said, I love your haircut. And it was amazing to me how few people know what's going on. Do you know how many people don't know where the Florida Panhandle is? It's flabbergasted. Like, it blows my mind. Just that people don't even understand that, let alone care beyond the initial pictures. So I think that's another thing that I want to keep doing every storm is keep the story up as much as I can, use this platform because it's, there's enough from the car fire this year where more than 1,000 homes were lost. We forget very quickly, and I don't want that to happen with Michael. I know we won't because we're all invested and we care about weather, But if you take yourselves out of this small pod that we all live in, it's scary. Not that this isn't, we don't have our issues too, but I think just reminding people and bringing them the humanity of it, that's going to be a big charge for me, is getting the stories out there.
Well, Ginger, you have an awfully loud megaphone, and I know you're going to use it in amazing ways, because we always debate, should meteorologists be in the middle of this? But I think some really good things are going to come out of you being there.
I think so too. I hope to keep it up. And thank you guys for having me, because I appreciate all of you and your passion for this, because it certainly matches mine.
Yes, we appreciate you and
Thanks.
having you in the
Thanks,
position you're
Thanks,
in,
Ginger.
Ginger. You're amazing. So thanks for being
Thanks,
here.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
So Mark, you got some amazing footage inside the eye. How in the world did you get there? And did you fear for your safety? And what was it like? I'm sorry, I meant Doug.
Oh, Doug, yeah.
Doug, talk about how you got there, and what, were you scared at any point?
It was a little nerve-wracking, to say the least. But when I looked at the elevation and the topography and the area that the eye was coming in, like was said before, that it was the perfect place for the worst case scenario of the eye to come in. But when I saw the eye was coming in and Mexico Beach was going to take the worst of it, I stayed on the west side of it, and I would not go more than a mile or two from the west side of the bridge there, just so the fact that I could, when the surge would come in, since there was no parking garages, there was no elevation to go to, I could just take off and head straight in towards the Air Force Base up 98, because it was going to go straight northwest. And what that allowed me to do was get about a mile away from the coast. So the surge was not going to be a factor, and it was still about 20, 25 feet in elevation there. The trees were sketchy along 98, but they were trimmed back far enough, and it's to the point where it wasn't going to be that big of a factor to worry about. It's still a factor to worry about, but once that jet of that surge came in, it was just time to go.
And that noise announces the arrival of Brett Adair. Brett, how are you tonight? Can you hear us?
I'm doing well, Bill. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Now, how far did you have to go to get in a signal for us tonight?
Man, we had to leave Panama City and come west on 98, almost to Destin, to get a good signal.
What's it like still down there, Brett? What's your greatest takeaways from the destruction?
Well, it's incredible. Obviously, wind damage wise, the comparison that I can raise from being in Puerto Rico last year during Hurricane Maria from the wind element, part of Panama City, the eastern side especially, over into Mexico Beach and even inland, it's just incredible. And that's probably one of the closest comparisons that I can give to that. And I know you've been talking to Doug and Mark here a little bit about that surge element, and that was also just extremely incredible as well. So
Brett, Mark, looked over at me that morning, and said, Bill, Brett Adair's in trouble. Talk about that experience and what put you in that situation and how you survived.
Well, we had a situation that developed talking back and forth with some of our meteorologists, worked for a company in Denver, Colorado, doing on-air work, and we were bantering back and forth about the exact path of the storm. And, obviously there was a little bit of a jog to the east element when we woke up that morning. Panama City was in the direct line of fire, and then, it shifted slightly east with the thought that Mexico Beach, Port St. Joe Beach area would be in trouble. So we were doing a little bit of scouting 3 hours or so before the eye wall came in. Went down to Mexico Beach, looked around, didn't see a lot that really made me feel comfortable, because with an approaching high-end Category 4, potentially Category 5 type storm, you're going to have substantial shelter. So we continued south and went down into Port St. Joe, and that area looked to be a little bit better. There was a hospital there that had some elevation, 26, 27 foot in elevation. ran into a colleague, Brian Emfinger, who's a photographer with another station, and he told me some information about, scouting out that particular spot and said it would be good for us to kind of hang together. I agreed, went down, did some shots there at the marina, when we had those outer bands that came in, where the winds were gusting, 80, 90 miles an hour at that point. So there were some pretty dramatic shots there. And as things started to get a little bit worse and, questions about, signal reliability to do, the things that we need to do while covering media, we decided to retreat inland just a little bit. And when we did that, there was a little bit of a miscommunication, talking back and forth with a friend of mine that's a meteorologist working with us, and, thought that I would come to Mexico Beach and we would keep a flow that would be, parallel to the shore and would keep the surge off long enough to get there. But where the miscommunication came in is he thought that hospital was somewhere in Mexico Beach versus St. Joe.
Mm-hmm.
So we continued northbound up the highway there and on 98 or westbound, and things started to get really, really bad. Obviously, we saw numerous buildings fly apart, had several pieces of the roofing structure come up over our vehicle. Kind of looked at my partner and he said, we got a bit of a problem here. And he was correct. Once the surge came in, we saw the power lines that were going down. And once the surge came in, I knew then, I was like, we got a big issue. So we were looking for the closest structure that we could find. Saw a retaining wall and a house that was on stilts on the north side of 98. So he backed in and we got some cover from the vehicle from the wind. So that helped us in that element. So I could see what we had approaching us surge wise. And, the surge came up really quick. I mean, bottom of the tires all the way up to, the midways up the doors of the truck. So I told him we've got to get out. There's no way, equipment and stuff. We're just going to have to leave everything. We can't, rush and try to get anything. We just got to go. So we backed the back of my truck up to the retaining wall, got out of the truck, got on the back bumper, and climbed onto the roof in order to jump that 10-foot retaining wall that was there. And we had two options. We had a house that was on stilts, or we had a house just to the north of that we were in the Bunker Hill communities where we were. And it was on the east side of Mexico Beach. And we then proceeded to go up toward another house. Came to find out it was built in like 1902. Had all kind of brush around it. Not any real big trees, but had a lot of brush that could block debris from being thrown into the windows. So we walked up there. Unfortunately and fortunately, we had a feed going from the truck that's been seen pretty widely now. And the owners of the structures saw that, and I actually got a message from my wife, and she said, hey, they say go in, get what you need. If you need dry clothes, if you got food there, if you got power that's any good, do whatever you need to do to survive. And, we can talk about everything else later. So they were installing hurricane windows on the structure, and there's one window that they didn't get installed. And we were able to just lift the window, go right in, no trouble, didn't have to break anything to get in the structure, and closed it. And we rode it out there for a couple of hours. I mean, parts of the roof came off. The sounds were, extremely eerie. However, if there's a positive to the situation with the job that we do, I think that we were thinking extremely quickly in order to get out of that surge zone, because I knew that was probably the most dangerous element of the entire event.
So, Mark Sudduth, I know you have to leave in a minute, and Brett's story is harrowing, and Ginger's is harrowing, and Doug's is harrowing. But it looks like something good could come out of this, from all of this amazing video and data and frightening situations that everyone was in.
Absolutely.
Hopefully people leave when,
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that we've got to help convince people in the future. And the good thing about the stationary video is it's got the whole thing. And being able to pull science out of it, I think, is going to be very helpful. There's some stuff in there that I don't understand what happened, and being able to see it from that point blank range, it's a different perspective. And I'm really excited to learn from it and discover some things that can help to motivate people next time. I just want to say one thing that was very disturbing. The night before, Tuesday night, when we were trying to set up the camera at the Exxon station, there's a Subway shop there, and it's right across from this restaurant called Toucans. And these people came out, and they had been drinking heavily, and they were carrying on, and they were like, y'all going to set up some weather equipment? And we were like, yeah, we explained it all to them. And they were like, y'all put it up on our house, put it up here. And you're going to have a better view up here, up on their porch. And they were staying. And we're like, no, we're going to put it on this telephone pole. Thank you. I appreciate it, sir. And the guy kept insisting, kind of getting agitated with us that he knew better than us. And it ended up, that we, no, sir, we're good. And so we mounted it where we did, about 8.5 feet above the ground using a ladder, ratchet strapped it down. Brent did that. It'll be in the documentary that I'm going to produce because we shot it. When we got there that night, the next night after, the night that it hit, we had big, powerful flashlights, of course. Most of that building does not exist. It's gone. The whole half part of it is completely swept clean, and that's wind damage. That's not surge up there that I'm aware of. And so hopefully they left, because if they stayed in that building, they're dead somewhere behind everything. But the sort of the audacity of them that they know more than I do, and I try not to be arrogant about my work, but I've been doing this for 22 years. And they asked, do you think it's going to be as bad as they say? And I said very clearly, it'll be worse. And they just kind of looked at me like, you're an idiot. And they carried on with their drinking. How do we get past that? I don't know that we can, to be quite honest with you.
One of the things I've said since Katrina was that they need to change the laws for alcohol. And now it's, if there's a hurricane warning or even a tropical storm warning, all alcohol sales are banned. No
That's
alcohol.
a great idea.
Bars, stores, done. And that would basically make everyone go, what? I can't drink? Well, I guess I better get out of here then.
No kidding.
And that's the only thing that makes sense in that situation, because you're just putting yourself in danger. There's no way.
And first responders.
Somebody should have been drinking.
Right. It was sad. I thought this is not good, and that's something I'll never forget. And kind of that irony of coming back, and the whole top level is not damaged. It does not exist, and there may have been some surge up there too. We'll just have to see.
That's exactly what I dealt with, the day before Katrina on Bourbon Street, New Orleans. I looked over at law enforcement officer, and it's like, why are you guys still open? It's a Cat 5 out there. It's coming in tomorrow night. He's like, no mandatory evacuation yet. Do whatever. I'm just like, oh my God, there's gonna be thousands of people dead here. And we know
that's exactly what happened. Right.
So I think that's just going to be the easiest way, is just to ban alcohol sales and then make everyone wake up. That's, as sad and stupid as that sounds, that's probably going to be your only option.
I think that's one of the best takeaways we've talked about already all night right there.
Absolutely.
No question about it. Mark, what else can you add? What other takeaway? What something we don't know?
Rapid intensification I'm still completely, because I said the words to my team, it'll probably weaken before it makes landfall. Most of them do.
Because it has over and over many times.
Right. But Max Mayfield one time was on TV with the guy with the bow tie on MSNBC. I can't remember his name. Doesn't matter. And he was arguing with him or whatever. And the guy said, well, they always weaken, Max. They always weaken. And Max, in that Max Mayfield voice, he said, oh, well, they always weaken except for the ones that don't.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Max was a prophet. There was no question about it.
This was the one that didn't.
Guys, how much do y'all think the approaching trough, maybe the extra diffluence associated with it, gave it that little extra impetus right there?
Absolutely, Bill. Absolutely. If you look at the satellite, which I was able to look at post storm, finally saw it on Josh Orgerman's page. Actually, it looked like once the interaction with land took place, the center of the storm, actually increased its spin rate along with the outflow channels were just amazing due to the little bit of diffluence you started to see, and it didn't ingest the dry air. So it was unfortunately the perfect storm for the panhandle. You know, even in the shallow water, the biggest thing that I've always heard, and like these guys were saying, you know, it'll weaken before it comes in. You know, this particular portion of the panhandle, even dating back to like Hurricane Opal, Hurricane Ivan, you know, they've never dealt with a system of this magnitude to give them a direct strike. They always thought, well, it'll go to Navarre, it'll go to Fort Walton, and that's the big issue with the society that we're dealing with right now.
Well, I think when I looked on the hurricane database back to 1851 on Monday night and thought, you know, if this is a Category 4, there's never been a Category 4 in the Panhandle. That was a very striking moment to me, and one that we started to hit really, really hard. But I remember, you know, that 1975 night, that September 23rd, when Eloise was, you know, coming toward the Panhandle. That trough had an impact on that storm. And it scared me. I told Scott Martin, you know, that morning, I said, that's what I fear. That last 20 millibars, 30 millibars may come out of that trough.
Gosh, that's amazing.
And it's going to be interesting to see post-assessment, you know, if even we don't try to touch that Category 5 type range, because some of this damage that you're witnessing, I mean, I know Doug saw it, especially over there on the western side of Mexico Beach first. The saplings, I mean, I've never seen debarked pine saplings before, you know, along with all of that water damage. And then the element of the surge. And in my case, further east, my truck was sitting at 13 feet and it surged another 10 where I was. And I was nowhere near. I was 1.5 miles to 2 miles from that main area of storm surge, along with wind. I can only imagine what the findings are going to be with the final wind rating and the height of that surge. I mean, it's just unprecedented.
Well, when I went into the eye, when the jet of that surge started coming in, drove about 5 miles to the northwest, got into the eye of the storm, and once the second or the back half of the storm came over, I tried to slowly creep back towards Mexico Beach, and I would just hit the surge about 4 miles, and it'd go down a little bit. And it took several hours before the surge would actually go down enough for me to actually get back into Mexico Beach.
Wow.
It was just intense just to see that much of it going inland. And that was one of the saving graces that I saw where the eye was coming in. I had at least 1 mile of distance and a barrier island to protect the location on the northeast side of the eye wall inside the eye. And if that wasn't there, I don't think I'd be here today. I don't think I would even risk going to Mexico Beach because it was just too dangerous. But I was just seeing that, you know, Tyndall Air Force Base was pretty much, I will say, it's like going into a forest. I mean, one of the things you have to worry about in these strong hurricanes and tornadoes is the debris. The debris that was flying around was just vegetation for where I was at, you know, 3 miles to the northwest up 98 as I'm watching the surge just kind of slowly recede. It wasn't until I got within a half mile of Mexico Beach that I actually start seeing, you know, pieces of homes, you know, up in the trees or what trees were left. And as soon as I got on top of the bridge, I looked down and I see a house or what's left of it floating down the creek there in the surge, and you know, everything's just decimated. I left and the place was starting to get hit by the hurricane force winds. I come back and it's nuked. So it was very intense for that, you know, but just trying to see how far inland that surge went was just astonishing.
So Doug, you were like one of those shorebirds that's caught in the eye of the hurricane. How the eye really saved you.
The eye, I went in and took refuge in the eye from the surge.
Mm-hmm.
I drove northwest. When I started seeing the surge come in, and I knew how high I was at that elevation, I drove northwest and into the eye. And I got amazing photos and video. You know, so people were sitting there going, you know, why did you do it? I'm like, more people have walked on the moon than did what I did to, you know, go into the eye wall, through the eye wall, and into the eye on the east side of that storm. It's just insane. When you sit there and you look up, and that part of the eye where it's completely blue sky, and you're looking all around, it's just, you're in a stadium. It's like the photo I'm calling it Stadium of the Gods.
Yeah,
So,
that's
I lamented
just
that
amazing.
because I wanted to launch the weather balloon into that, and we couldn't get there. I just couldn't risk it. That'll be the one that got away, but that eye wall footage, from Mexico Beach, from the GoPro.
I mean, that's
I'll
still
take
once
that.
in a lifetime shots.
Exactly.
Having a fixed position where you can time lapse it going up and then back down.
Absolutely. I mean, we all have, and what Doug did is just tremendous in terms of that photo, and he'll have that for the rest of his life. And we know that there will be others. I don't say that flippantly. And we'll figure out a way to get that weather balloon into the eye of a hurricane as intense as Michael. We did it last year during Nate. And that was an 80-mile-per-hour dying hurricane at night. That was a little different, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, to get that blue sky at noon.
Sure.
That was.
Now you need to buy some lottery tickets.
Nah, that's just an additional tax. I don't buy that anymore.
And I thought it was interesting what Tom Johnstone said about, the ocean and the energy that's in it, because I remember clearly, and maybe now that we've got Bill Reed and Brian joining us too, they can comment on it. And you guys looked at it extensively as the storm was emerging into the Gulf of Mexico. The oceanic heat content seemed to really drop over the Gulf of Mexico, except maybe for an eddy or two. But the water temperatures were still, sufficient, it looked like to me. But when I saw, and I think it was on Tuesday afternoon or Tuesday night, the plane dropping the instruments into the ocean and coming back with the water temperatures, there for a while it was around 26.5 degrees Celsius. And then all of a sudden, ahead of the path, right in the direct path, it was 29. And that gave me a foreboding feeling that night too. Did y'all see some of that same, that same experience in terms of the water temperatures ahead of the storm?
I did notice especially as you got up close to the coast. Normally by October, you've had a few fronts and some swelling and some cooler, drier air over it. So we had warmer water on the approach to the coast than you probably would normally have. And like you mentioned, from the Yucatan Channel through the Southeast Gulf looked pretty typical to normal to me. But again, that's still plenty of heat content in there to support the storm that developed, even in a normal setup. We've
been surmising, Bill, about the approaching trough and the diffluence that it provided. How much of the impact do you think that had on the rapid intensification in the last few hours before landfall?
Well, I don't know. I think I've talked to a few guys offline. I hope they really do a good diagnosis from the data they have to try to ascertain that. I don't know how to do that subjectively, and I really wasn't looking at the raw data at the point.
Well, Bill, it's awesome to have you here, former director of the National Hurricane Center, great friend of the show. He holds the record for most appearances on WeatherBrains.
Oh, wow.
And, it's nice to have you on when there's not water lapping at your doorstep, Bill.
Yeah, no, last time we talked on this show, my dog was barking at the door because the water was up to the edge of the door sill on the porch during Harvey. So it's a lot quieter tonight.
Good. Well, we had Tom Johnstone on earlier, and we told him we had to stop talking like this. So if he moves again, I think insurance rates are going to skyrocket wherever he goes.
Where is he now?
He's at Tallahassee. And
I didn't know that. I thought I don't keep track of it very well, do I? Where all my old buddies went.
Yeah, I don't think I knew that either until Jen McNatt told me about it. But Bill, it's nice to have you here. Now, Mark South, do you need to leave, or can you stick around?
Well, now that you got these two legends in, this is.
Well, that's good. Well, you stick around. Brett, are you good? Or can you hang out?
Burst through the door.
I'm good. I can hang out as long as needed.
Okay, good. And are you good, Doug? You need to hang out, or you need to go? Good.
I'm good.
Brian Norcross, it's awesome to talk to you. And you went through a very similar experience in Miami in 1992. How long is it going to take the Panhandle to get back to normal?
It's going to be a long time. I think the big economic question there is whether the military is going to rebuild Tyndall and to what extent, because a huge part, I want to say it's more than 50% of the economy of that region. Obviously, there's a tourist economy, but of the non-tourist economy is based on that military base. So, you know, the situation with the Homestead Air Force Base was a smaller version of that, but the fact that they did not rebuild Homestead Air Force Base and all those people moved out was made it much harder for Homestead to recover, and it took a lot longer.
Yeah, I thought the very same thing. There are a lot of similarities there, aren't there, Brian, between the
There
military
are, although
base?
Tyndall is a bigger operation and a more important operation, but it's a vital operation. I mean, the F-22s that fly out of there, you know, that's our most modern airplane, and so they've got to put them somewhere, and they've got to set up ways to maintain them and whatnot. So that was the problem at Homestead is the operations had to continue. So they couldn't just wait around to rebuild that base. And it seems to me with Eglin so close, you know, there's going to be pressure to not spend the money to put a full Air Force base back there. It seems to me that's going to happen. I don't know. I don't know anything about what's going on with the Pentagon, and there's politics involved, you can bet. But it's going to be a tough decision because that's not a well-located base if you think about it. When that base was originally put there, it was kind of outside of town. Now you've got town all around it, right? In kind of every direction, well, especially to the north, and Panama City's jammed up against it, and then you have Mexico Beach on the other side. So it's not as well located as it once was. Anyway, it's tough. To me, that's the big question about the speed of recovery. If a bunch of people leave and you don't have that economic engine,
there's a lot of mom and pop places down there too. It's not a chain, and they're done. You know they are, and it's devastating.
Yeah, just like one story after the other. You hear they didn't have insurance. They didn't have insurance. Just constantly, you're hearing that.
That's what we've been dealing with here on the ground as well, Brian. We're still here talking to people, just kind of helping out, bringing some supplies in, and we've been around talking. And the one main concern, as you mentioned, is the Air Force Base, because a lot of these mechanics and a lot of these men work here at the Air Force Base, and they're just super concerned because, again, other than the tourist economy, it's one of the better paying jobs here in this local area. And then all the mom and pop stores, you know, we actually took some refuge with the owner of the fish house in Mexico Beach. He was a great guy, and went into his restaurant, and he's not quite as bad off as everybody else. But you got to think, with all the salt water that impeded those structures, that, you know, they're pretty much a total loss.
Yeah, I mean, just think about it. That you have two different issues going on there. One is that a lot of those places, those things were built, you know, on grade, on the ground. I mean, those were just not built with storm surge in mind at all. And then even things that are modern there were not built to a code that could deal with a hurricane of this strength. So there's really, except for the rare building that somebody took extra steps to make it stronger than the code required. The New York Times had a big article about this one house standing in Mexico Beach. I'm sure you saw that. You know, and those the article was not very specific, but you can bet that it's essentially Miami-Dade code, windows and doors and whatnot, with extra stuff on top of that to make that house that strong. But the fact is that it's, for all different kind of reasons, nothing there really had a code that would work for a strong Category 4 hurricane.
So the question is, will we get a code that can survive that in other parts of Florida and along the U.S. coastline? Bill Reed?
Well, the most amazing thing post-Harvey is that they're actually putting in writing proposals to have a coastal building code in the state of Texas. You know, this is the local jurisdiction has all the authority in the state, so the state has stayed hands off, and it's a mess. The insurance is a mess. None of the big insurers want to offer windstorm, so you have to go to a cat pool that is basically bankrupt if the big one augers into Galveston County, where a big chunk of their clients are. So that was a wake-up call. It hit an area with relatively low density population, and they found there was a number of houses that were built to a more modern code that survived Harvey, and they actually are taking that to heart. The other thing that's happening around here post Harvey is the city of Houston and Harris County have gone through the 500-year flood elevation rather than the 100-year. Now, it's got problems because I don't think it's very accurately, I don't think the 100-year was accurately drawn. If you look at what flooded and what did, not just in Harvey, but in other floods prior to that, it doesn't make sense. The flood thing. But at any event, there is, and it's continuing a year later, the emphasis is still there. Florida's got a better history of states supporting a code, but I know their legislature got run over by lobbyists in the building industry and backed off on the strong statewide code they had, which required them to always improve to the latest international code. That became more of an option in the law that was passed. We'll see if that gets rescinded here after this.
And I think there's going to be pressure from all quarters to do something about the problem that they actually have the builders and architects and whatnot, people in the building industry in charge of the building code in the state of Florida. So this is sort of like putting the drug industry in charge of the FDA. You know, it's not a sensible way to run a government agency, and I think there will be pressure to fix it because there's two big things. One, the thing Bill was talking about is disconnecting the Florida code from the ICC, international code, the standard that pretty much everybody uses. Number one. Number two is there was a lot of pressure to exclude the Panama City area and the Eastern Panhandle from the rules when they put the building code into effect in 2002. 5 years later, they rescinded a little bit of that. They required shutters within a mile of the coast, but still they acted like you couldn't really ever get a Category 3 or 4 hurricane in the Eastern Panhandle, in spite of the fact that Eloise was a Category 3 in 75 and Kate was a 2 in late November in 85. In the 19th century, there's a whole raft of hurricanes that went up that way, and we don't really know how strong they were. But so anyway, it was more politics than it was meteorology or good science that drew that map that kind of excludes the Eastern Panhandle from the strong building code that the southern part of the state has. And by the way, the Western Panhandle has. Over by Pensacola, they've got a pretty good code. It's not the same as Miami, but it's very good. But they excluded the Eastern Panhandle. It's craziness.
Well, what was the reason for the exemption?
Well, because they you know, it was a lot of lobbying that went on. It's more expensive to meet that code, and you have to have all these inspections. It's a pain in the neck to build anything under the code because everything you do, you have to have an inspector come out to show, yes, I put all the nails in, yes, I put all the screws in, because builders will sometimes make a mistake, leave stuff out, and go ahead and put the stucco on or the wallboard on or whatever, and the mistake is there, and then the wind comes up and it blows the whole window in because it wasn't attached to the structure. So now to build a home in Miami-Dade County and for many, many years here, it's just a pain. But they've got it down, and they know how to do it now, and they know what to do. Do you have the inspector come and do a bunch of things, and then they move on to the next step? Inspector comes back, but that's every house, every time, every building, and builders up there are not used to that kind of rigorous inspection of their work. So it's a culture that you have to develop.
Well, hopefully it'll change. Phil Klotzbach, you joined us tonight from California. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. How you doing?
Pretty good. Talk about this hurricane. Put it in perspective for us. Bill, we were following your tweets in the hours leading up to it, and they provided some really good retweeting material when we were trying to get the word out.
Well, as you gentlemen were talking about, obviously, the Panhandle, experienced a very, very strong hurricane. The landfalling intensity was, the central pressure, I think, was really, to me, the most notable thing. 919 millibars. I mean, that's just lower than Katrina and Andrew. So when those kind of storms are the ones you're comparing to, those are obviously very, very significant and obviously lower pressure. typically correlates with very strong winds, and also too, for the same intensity storm, basically lower pressure for the same intensity storm means that the storm is larger because the winds operate off of that pressure gradient. So certainly, obviously, it was a very, very powerful hurricane, and certainly, as you've talked about, the eastern part of the Florida Panhandle was just absolutely inundated by this storm. It was the third lowest continental U.S. landfall pressure on record, behind just the Labor Day hurricane at 35, as well as Camille in 69, and then the strongest Category 4 hurricane hit the U.S. on record in terms of wind, just behind the 3 Category 5s of the Labor Day, Camille, and Hurricane Andrew in 92. And obviously, as gentlemen were talking about, the building codes, unfortunately, in the eastern part of the Florida Panhandle are some of the weakest in the state, and certainly we saw. Obviously with the damage from the storm surge, but also just a lot of wind damage. And I think with Michael, I think it kind of illustrates the point that every hurricane has different impacts. You have the wind, you have the surge, you have the rain, and obviously with Florence, the wind wasn't too much of an issue, but obviously the surge was somewhat of an issue, and the rain was a huge issue. With Michael, rain was more of an issue, it seemed like, as the storm moved further along into the Carolinas and Virginia, when you started getting some more topographical impacts. But obviously the surge was a big issue, and then obviously the wind was just a huge issue. And every hurricane, you have a storm like Hurricane Andrew, where almost all the damage from the storm was wind. And Michael, reminds people that, everyone talks about the water with hurricanes, and certainly that's important, but sometimes the wind can be a huge issue too. And obviously with Michael, we certainly saw that was the case, because in places like Mexico Beach, you saw what the surge did to the first few rows of houses, and then as you move further inland, you saw what the wind did, and obviously the wind was a huge factor with Michael.
So Brett, you were there. I don't know. We may have lost Brett. There he is, and I'll ask you, and I'll ask Mark and Doug. How high do you think the official surge is going to turn out to be on this hurricane?
It has to be 20 plus feet. I can't imagine that it would be lower than 25 potentially, just given the elevation, that unofficial elevation of where my vehicle was and how much higher it came, and knowing that it was higher west of me, like I said, over near where Mark's camera was and close to where Doug was initially near that bridge. I mean, I'm really interested to see this post assessment, because several feet into the trees, we went through there 2 days ago, passed through Toucan's restaurant area and went over to the bridge area. And I mean, you've got plywood and debris, which obviously some of it's wind driven, but it's well up into the trees, and it's you can see somewhat of a water line, at least 4 or 5 feet up the trees north of Highway 98. So I would say a 20-foot surge is quite probable out of the system.
Would you agree with that, Doug?
Talking with the gentleman who owned the condo that I helped that injured couple get into today, I'm going to say 25 feet. He says they saw the water line on their structure, and they estimated at 25 plus feet that came in there.
And you're talking wave action on top of that also?
You're talking wave action on top of it. He's basically just saying the line that they had inside of the structure. So you're not talking wave action, just the sediment line.
Yeah, because that's a true telling factor, isn't it, Bill Reed? That where you find that line inside structures.
Yeah, that's one of the toolkits we have for high water marks, is still water marks inside the buildings. Hopefully I don't know, but usually the USGS tries to get out ahead of these and get some of their sensor gauges on poles and whatnot to get highly accurate readings from the pressure sensors. I don't know if they were able to get out for this one or not.
They were.
Oh, good. Those will be very good
I've seen it.
for accuracy.
So, Mark,
Bill, something that's going to be interesting is the forecast from the National Hurricane Center during the storm, if you remember, was at a maximum 14 feet. And so, they run the model with kind of an extreme version of the storm to get that maximum. Now, that's not that's above the high tide line, but the high, the tide swing there is only about a foot or a little over a foot on that part of the coast. So doesn't add that much. So if you really have storm surge that's 20 feet or more, that tells you that the wind that generated that had to be higher than the wind that they were inputting into the model by a good ways. So it's going to be interesting.
or there could have been some issues with the model. Like
Could have.
there was not a lot of history.
Right.
It's above the highest storm that probably went into the databases that created the model in there. So there could be some errors in the model.
Well, Brian, you've seen the video. You sent me a map, and we've talked about it on email from my camera. So here's what I'm trying to wrap my brain around. The camera saw the entire event, and not one time during the entire event did the water go over the camera. There were some waves that kind of splashed over it, and the camera was 8.5 feet above the concrete. We'd have to get a survey how much higher was from the ocean was that concrete at the Exxon, but the camera never went underwater. So how could it be 20 to 25 feet if the camera never went underwater? I only saw a few waves come in. And
and the calculation I had been doing since I heard this tonight was I saw a house that the water was up to the eaves. And I figure, okay, that's got to be, 9 feet, 10 feet at the highest, right? And I went and looked at the elevation of that location, and it was about 2 meters thick. All right, so there you have 15, 16 feet, somewhere in that range, 14 to 16 feet if you add it all up, right? So I agree with you, Mark. It's a conundrum here. It's going to be very, very
Where
interesting.
were the waves? There's hardly any waves in my video.
Well, so you're normally not going to get waves, right? You either get surge or waves. Because if you have a sharp shelf, the energy goes up and it makes waves. If you have a gradual slope, the energy goes forward and it makes surge. So, when you get big surge, you generally don't get big waves. You get just wind waves, just wind-driven.
But we had the big waves in Katrina. You saw them rolling in on top of 28 feet. So I'm taking it back.
Something had to be generating that energy up.
Right.
In Katrina, that perhaps something to do with the coastline that's different, because that's generally the difference.
Well, you don't get much more shallow than the Mississippi Sound, but anyway.
Mark, one of the things I was talking with Jim Eds about this yesterday, because he was trying to figure out how I made it in and out of there. And we were looking at the elevation, and we saw that Mexico Beach is kind of in a valley as it comes out to the coast. So the elevation kind of changes, little bit here and there. So you could have just had it, you're on a pole that would have been a little bit higher than what, was 50 feet down the road.
Sure.
Maybe.
Well, this is an important message, because I remember Camille coming in, and some of the most important messaging that Sunday that probably motivated people to go were these crazy storm surge heights that were in the advisories. And, maybe we were missing that in this situation. What do y'all think about that?
Yeah, I don't know, Bill. I saw Camille. I was I saw what it did. The February after Camille, I was driving from Tallahassee over to New Orleans for Mardi Gras. And it was only half of I-90 was all that you could get through Biloxi on. And it looked like this storm, in that it was as far as you could see from I-90 inland, there was nothing standing. It was all just debris and cleared houses and whatnot. By that February, they cleared away a lot of the debris, but some of it was still there. So I don't know. There's a whole issue with, they forecast the Category 3 2 days before this happened. Somehow that was not sufficient to convince people just based on the forecast. They forecast the Category 3 with 12 feet of surge 2 days before, more than 48 hours before landfall. So somehow that wasn't sufficient. So if they had forecast a Category 4 and 20 feet of surge, would that have made a difference? I kind of doubt it. I just doubt it.
There's some serious problems going on. If a lot of people didn't evacuate and they were given the orders to evacuate, I don't think there's anything you can say in the forecast that'll change that. They're in denial that anything's going to happen to them.
Oh, they definitely were.
Yes.
So is that what you guys experienced there in the communities in the hours and day before the hurricane?
Hurricane so-and-so didn't do it, so I don't think this will either. I'm going to be fine.
Yep, that's exactly what happened. And then when you talk to people, the most eerie and almost scary thing for me when we were looking around Mexico Beach, a couple of blocks off the beach, you had a lot of trailer type homes, mobile homes.
Yes.
And I'm like, storm surge or not, a strong hurricane hits here, even a hurricane in a mobile home, I'm not going to feel safe. Why would you stay? And there were just an abundant amount of people that, you know, stayed and rode it out because, again, hurricane so-and-so didn't strike the area, it went west or whatever. But another point that I've been thinking about is, you know, the tight pressure gradient, I feel like, assisted in making this maybe a smaller area of just complete devastation versus a Katrina. And one other thing that I've looked at and kind of questioned, Bill and Dr. Norcross can probably answer this, the north side of the Cape there, the surge you would think would have to possibly funnel around that north side and maybe increase the surge height there into the Mexico Beach area because they're not quite protected as areas south down toward Port St. Joe.
It just depends on the angle of the wind, right? The Mexico Beach, you know, if it was more or less straight on to the coast, right, which is kind of southwest.
When the storm was coming up, it was paralleling. It was coming straight at me, coming up 98.
Right.
But it switches.
It wasn't until the eye came on shore that you had the onshore winds. I mean,
that was the big surge. The big surge was the biggest surge with the eye where you were.
What's that?
It was the biggest surge with the eye. When the eye came right as the eye was making landfall, when they got that perpendicular to
where I was at, you jumped on after I told you. What happened was, where I was at, I was playing the west side of Mexico Beach just so I could escape up, going to the northwest, and basically be a bird and go into the eye of the storm. Mm-hmm. As that wind shift just started to happen, it was just going straight northwest winds coming out of the southeast, going straight up 98. I mean, I could have put the car in neutral and posted all the way up into the eye. And it just, that's how intense it was. And it was just right at that point is when the surge just started coming in. And it was like being blasted by a jet engine. And that's, it was just all that wind coming right on the coast was just not going directly in. It was just paralleling it until that eye hit. It was just a 180-degree shift. It was that perfect meteorological hurricane.
Yeah.
Yep. And extremely quick too, Doug. That happened, that wind shift, that was one of the things that, if we were caught off guard with our situation, that's exactly what happened. You could see the flow was parallel to the coast, and it happened within a matter of minutes, really seconds. When it shifted onshore, it was on. That surge was on us quick.
Whoever said there was a big gradient here was absolutely right, because this whole thing only took a couple hours, right? From the first blast to the last blast. Right. I thought Hurricane Andrew was quick, and that was 3.5 hours. I mean, this was just a little more than half that time. So what that tells you is that the gradient had to have been spectacularly tight between the inside of the eye wall and and where the pressure really began to flatten out outside. So that, I think, is what accounted for the really strong wind and this very focused surge.
One of the interesting things I saw inside the eye, looking back to the southeast, you could literally see that eye wall. Like it's like almost like looking at a wedge tornado, just sitting here going across 98, across what was left of the trees. And the temperature jumped. The anemometer I had broke, so I couldn't get any pressure readings. But looking at the vehicle temperature, it jumped almost 10 degrees when that sun came out in the eye.
Wow.
Did you get any dew point readings inside the eye too?
The only thing I could get was just temperature from the vehicle. The Kestrel broke.
Now I know we're going to lose you here in a second, Phil, because you got to go. Give us some takeaways from your observations of the storm.
Oh yeah, I mean, you guys have obviously covered a lot of stuff already since I've been on the show, and it sounds like you were covering stuff before I got here. So, yeah, I mean, certainly it was, obviously an incredibly intense storm, and like you mentioned, I think the pressure gradient as you were coming through was quite tight. I was trying to pull up the aircraft recon, but I wasn't quite quick enough to pull it up in 30 seconds. But I think you're right; it was a very tight gradient between where the winds were super strong. Basically, it's a very tight gradient near the eye wall or in the eye wall of this storm. And certainly, obviously, it was a very powerful storm, one of the strongest ones the Panhandle has experienced. I know Brian and I were having some chats over email about this last week. The Panhandle you know, they had Eloise, they had a couple of storms in the earlier 1900s, and then but if you go back to the late 1800s, there were a whole pile of storms up into the Panhandle. I believe there were 3 in 1886 before August 1st. And back then the population was low, so they're listed as like Cat 1 or 2, but the Hurricane Center puts kind of these asterisks when they say we really don't know. You know, it was at least this strong, but probably stronger. And so, you know, I mean, the Panhandle certainly does get these nasty storms on occasion. It may have just been a while. And, you know, like we talked about with Michael too, I mean, it was obviously very powerful even when it went into Georgia. It's the first time Georgia had a Category 3 hurricane in the state since 1898. So even though it's been a long time, these storms do happen. So I think it's important to realize that, you know, you have to look back in the history books and look back in time. I mean, it's certainly the longest, you know, in recent history, but you know, when we're designing building codes and looking at these things, we have to realize that, you know, choosing the last 30 or 40 years as the base period may not be the best way to set building codes. Obviously, as I'm sure you gentlemen are well aware, you know, we had 5 Cat 4 or 5 hurricanes hit South Florida in 6 years from 1945 to 1950. So, you know, that's just in the history books without talking about climate change or anything else. That's just what we've seen in the past. So I think certainly that's kind of the things I try to take away. You know, I work with Bill Gray, and he was always really big into history and learning the historical hurricanes. And I think, you know, when you look at these storms, it may have been a long time, but you need to realize that, you know, these nasty storms do happen. And, you know, that, you know, I mean, obviously we saw massive impacts, but had Michael been 100 miles further west and had gone more up into Mobile Bay, I mean, you could just imagine the damage and devastation with a much larger population that was significantly impacted by Michael. So, you know, I mean, these storms are out there and they do happen. And I think one last thing I would say is, you know, I think after Florence and Irma, you know, people kind of got the idea that you have 2 weeks notice for every hurricane that hits. And as you are well aware, you know, stuff in the Gulf, it can be 3-4 days from naming of a storm to a very significant landfall like a Camille or an Alicia. And obviously with Michael, like you said, it was still 48 hours out. They said major hurricane with up to 12 feet of storm surge. But I think sometimes people kind of assume, oh, I just heard about this, and therefore it must not be coming for at least a week. And you don't always have that notice. One last thing I was going to say, I was looking at a couple of stories on the surge, and the stuff I've seen online, they're still saying 9 to 12 feet, maybe as much as 14. I think the Hurricane Center tweeted something, or the Slosh unit tweeted out something recently about that, but I know they're doing the actual surveys now. So some of those high water marks and stuff that you guys are mentioning, I think will be on there then, and then they can kind of potentially recalibrate and increase that number.
Well, Phil, thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate you being here. We'll have you back in the winter when it calms down a little bit.
Sounds good. Thank you. Take care.
All right. Mark, I know we got to lose you here too. Any last takeaways before you head out?
It's just overwhelming. The weird dreams have started. I called it post-traumatic stress syndrome, but that's not quite what it is. It's more of an acute stress. After these big events, I have these just bizarre dreams where I kind of relive it, but with horrific outcomes. It's very strange. And I've had trouble sleeping until last night. Last night was the first really good night of sleep, but it gets infiltrated by these just bizarre dreams, and they're hard to describe. And so they do affect us that study them in person. We're not machines, you know, that go out there, and it leaves a mark one way or the other. I'm just glad everything worked. All of our equipment survived. We have incredible data from that bridge that I was talking about, and we're going to be giving that to Hurricane Research Division and seeing what they can make of it. I understand that some of the higher profile research teams did not come to this. I need to verify that before I speak publicly about it, but I didn't see any stick nets out there. Let's just say that from Texas Tech. This would have been the perfect event. I don't know that they didn't come out there as a fact, but I heard that a lot of the projects that were funded, et cetera, weren't real sure it was going to do much and didn't decide not to. They decided not to mobilize. That's a loss because we could have learned a lot. So at least I got to contribute something, a little pat on my back.
There you go. Hey, Mark, I have a question for you.
Please.
You mentioned a documentary. Do you usually do, I guess, with all the storms that you go and you research and you video, do you usually put those together, or do you have something special that you're thinking of for Michael?
Well, since 05, I've been doing documentaries. I enjoy it. It's the only chance I get to play filmmaker. And yes, I'll do one for 2018 and I am trying to figure out how to do sort of the grandest version of it that I've ever done. Yes.
Well, Mark, we're just glad you're safe. We're glad you stayed in one piece, and thank you for all the incredible things that you do.
Oh, great company tonight. It's an honor to be a part of it.
It really has been an amazing group, and you were an unbelievable part of it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Bill, and everyone else. I'm going to go put the kids to bed. Ciao.
Good to see you, Mark.
Ciao. All right. I know, James, you've got a piece there that Brian recorded for us today. We're going to start talking about code and policy and stuff here in addition to other things. Brett, can you stay? Are you good? Or do you need to leave?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay, good. Doug, how about you? Are you good to stay?
For a while.
All right. Well, hang on. We got 3 more folks that are going to join us, and then we'll move it on out here if everybody will hang on with us. James, if you'd play that piece for us.
Why was there so much damage from Hurricane Michael? The easy answer is Hurricane Michael was a spectacularly strong hurricane near the top of the scale. The rest of the answer is, however, that important people decided that homes and businesses and Air Force bases housing billions of dollars in airplanes should be built to a lower standard than Mother Nature's reality dictated. They bet that a super strong storm was not going to come along. They lost the bet. After 1992's Hurricane Andrew revealed gaps in the details and the implementation of the South Florida Building Code, Miami-Dade County said never again. Broward County and the Keys largely went along. The building code, building materials, and inspection protocols were beefed up to meet the challenge of a top-end hurricane. The current South Florida Code is a world standard. Meanwhile, the politicians in North Florida fought tooth and nail to limit the strict standards Miami-Dade implemented. They decided that one of those Andrew-like buzzsaws was never going to hit the Panhandle or most of the rest of the state, so lower standards were good enough. They made this decision in spite of the fact that Hurricane Camille, one of the 2 storms that hit the U.S. with higher winds than Andrew, was originally forecast to hit the Florida Panhandle before curving left at the last minute and hitting Mississippi. And Category 3 Hurricane Eloise that hit just west of Panama City did significant damage there in 1975. And Category 2 Hurricane Kate hit Mexico Beach in 1985. And despite a litany of strong hurricanes that hit the Panhandle in the 19th century. Strong building codes are a pain in the neck. Constant inspections are required because builders sometimes cut corners and then cover them up with drywall or stucco. But the only way to build a safe, enduring community in the hurricane zone is to build the buildings that are constructed with the reality of the natural environment in mind. It's horrendous what the people in Panama City and the surrounding area are dealing with, and it's only the beginning. After Hurricane Andrew, some people suffered for months and years. It was wrenching to see and horrifying to live. Hopefully, the people in Panama City and the surrounding area who've had their lives turned upside down by Hurricane Michael will demand better leadership in the future. The wheel does not have to be reinvented. Miami-Dade has set world-class standards. What we need are leaders that understand that Florida is a sore thumb sticking out into Hurricane Alley. While South Florida may get hurricanes more often, the entire state has a hurricane history that includes ultra-strong hurricanes. It's up to all of us to demand that our representatives ignore the voices that favor weaker codes and mandate standards that are strong enough to be sure our communities are livable even after a major storm. The cost of years of reduced tax rates and disrupted communities that we're witnessing in the Panhandle is far greater in dollars, heartache, and lives than building to appropriate standards in the first place.
And I bet Leslie Chapman Henderson would give a big amen to that editorial.
That's for sure.
Leslie, welcome to the show. Where are you coming to us from tonight?
Thank you. I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Well, that sounds like a lot better place than Tallahassee. Has the power come back on at your house?
Just today. But Federal Alliance for Safe Homes has got a lot of team members across the country, and we're also very cloud-based. So we've learned the hard way that structures don't matter. We keep it all up in the air there, so it works out well.
So your big conference is coming up shortly, Leslie. What sort of impact has this hurricane had on the things that you guys are doing?
Well, we're pretty excited about being able to showcase a lot of the findings, the new science, and the innovation from last year's epic and deadly season. And we have a lot of good science and other findings. We've also got early insights from our partners at AIR Worldwide on the Florence outcomes. And today we confirmed that we'll be able to talk a little bit about Michael, but I heard a little bit about what Brian was talking about. And, you know, part of this is excruciatingly frustrating because some of the findings are new and different, but too many of them really aren't. You know, even prior to Andrew, the exact same syndrome that came up is being played out yet again. So we always talk about interrupting the build, destroy, rebuild cycle. That's what we've got to do once and for all. So when we come together for the conference, we really bring in all those collective voices, all the different disciplines, professions, scientists, researchers, practitioners, meteorologists, engineers, and hope is that by putting all of our voices together, that someone will hear us. And I think that's the case. We make these strides because of the storms and the suffering of the people that are hit by the storms. It's up to all of us to make sure that we get this progress, get the Florida Building Code back on track. There has been some good news on the policy front. I don't know if you guys have talked a little bit about the new federal legislation that's out there, but something very landmark has happened within the last several weeks, and that is the president signed a bill that incorporated some very good common sense things. It was part of the FAA reauthorization, but the Disaster Recovery Reform Act has some things in it that are going to help us with something called pre-disaster mitigation. Instead of being so good at this after it happens, we have a chance and we have the resources potentially for communities to get out in front. We're going to talk a lot about those things. We're going to kind of, our conference, the National Disaster Resilience Conference, is kind of a big pep rally to try to, inspire people and reassure them they're not alone out there in the safety wilderness fighting this fight alone. And out of it, many good things have happened in the past. Governors putting more money into research, or Disney experiences getting constructed. So we're looking for big things to happen again this year.
We need it, Leslie. So please keep up the good fight. You invited Mike Romoldi, who's your technical guy there with codes and disaster stuff there at Flash. Mike, glad we got you on the show. Thanks for being here tonight.
Hi, Bill. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
I know we've got the best crew here to talk about codes and things like that at this point, and we've got some guys who experienced the code or lack thereof. Bill Reed, I'll never forget that house on the Bolivar Peninsula that just stood out, and then we saw it happen again here with Dr. Herbert LeBron Lackey's house there in Mexico Beach. If you build these things to code, good things happen.
Yeah, there is proof in the results, and I think I'm seeing some of the reports coming out of post Harvey, the newer construction. Some of it was built to a much stronger code and fared considerably better than the older stock there. We were notorious for having virtually, I call it the gravity and nails building code. And nails only work if they make wood. My first house down here was that way. A whole chunk of the siding fell off one day. No wind, no nothing. The nails weren't in wood. The rafters and the interior of the attic to the elements. No way a house like that should be built in the hurricane zone or anywhere.
So, Bill, when you chose your house where you live in League City, what went into that decision-making process for picking that house?
The number one thing that motivated me to go with this builder was he was advertising. He was building it to that time, the existing top code of 2003, which was I've never seen a builder advertise that, and that was number one. Number two was it's the highest ground in Galveston County, and theoretically is outside of the 500-year floodplain. I'm not so sure about that anymore.
Yeah, Harvey almost broke that, didn't he?
Well, that rain was outside of the 1,000-year curve that first night, so all bets are off when you get a rain like that.
So, we've talked about it a lot tonight. The exemption in the Panhandle and why that was there. Talk about that for a second, Mike. Share some expertise on why the codes are so different parts of the state of Florida, different parts of the United States.
Sure, Bill. Yeah. Within the United States, one of the big things we see is there's not statewide unified codes in a lot of the other states. There are some differences and anomalies in the state of Florida, but at least we do have a statewide code. So, at least within the state, a lot of those things are the same. Where you run into trouble is when you have other states where it may vary by county to county, city to city. And then, you can cross a county line and have a totally different set of requirements. And, that not only hurts the homeowner, but that makes it tough for contractors too, because different rules apply, maybe more or less right across the municipal line. So, that's one of the big push when you talk about continuity and consistency with codes. I think that's what benefits everybody.
So nothing stops you from building, stronger than the code, of course, Mike.
Absolutely.
And what advice would you have for people that are trying to relocate or rebuild in this very dangerous coastal zone where these sort of things happen from time to time?
Well, I think that's a great point you made, Bill, that, the code is the minimum. So when you're looking at reconstruction or new construction, the idea is anything that you can exceed on the code is great. So, one of the first things we tell people is, with regards to flooding and storm surge, know what your flood zone is. And I mean, anybody can look that up on the FEMA Map Services Center to know what their zone is, where their potential house or property is located, and know what the elevation requirements are. And then that's when we talk about just not meeting the elevation requirements, but exceeding those with, the term freeboard. Add that extra elevation to your foundation, to your finished floor, to get you above and beyond what the expected flood range might be. And that, that's just the start for things like flooding and storm surge, and then we can talk about a whole host of things with regards to wind and windborne debris protection as well.
So what are some
Bill,
of the...
can I ask a question of Leslie and Mike?
Yes, absolutely. This is free for all tonight, Brian. Go for it.
So the code in the Panama City area is more or less a strong Category 2, low-end Category 3 as the nominal wind. They use these funny words like basic wind and ultimate wind. The ultimate wind. Anyway, it's pretty crazy words in the document. But anyway, it ends up being 110 to 115 miles per hour as a kind of a sustained wind kind of thing there. But they talk about that being a 700-year return period. Do you have any idea when I look at the hurricane history going back 100 years or 130 or 40 years? There's about 5 or 6 or 7 of them in that general area that show up. So how in the world do you end up justifying a 700-year return period, which ends up being a 7% chance over 50 years, to hang your hat on that for a wind standard like they did? Do you know?
I'll tackle that first, Mike, and then if you want to chime in. So I think they're not just talking a historic in that, Brian, they're looking at models. I saw a map today, very preliminary, from NIST, because they take, as you know, they've got the regions and they've expected wind speeds and the contours. And of course, nature loves to trip us up, when Wilma came in and came over and got stronger, et cetera, because of the lake. But preliminarily, the performance of that model, the American Society of Civil Engineers wind map, which is modeled off of the ARA numbers, is looking pretty accurate. So I don't think they're just looking back. They don't have, obviously, 700 years, but the modeling, and a lot of it is black box, so you don't know every element that goes into the machine, but a lot of the modeling has been very accurate. The problem with the Panhandle is that after we had that 1 mile exception, and it sounds like you guys already talked about that a lot, there have also been honestly what happened after the windborne debris region battle, which wasn't just a panhandle problem. Remember, there was an internal pressurization option around all the other coastlines except for South Florida and the high velocity zone. When the opponents of strong building codes lost that Florida battle, okay, over the wind maps, what happened is they took that battle to the actual promulgation of the maps. And there was some tinkering done to the maps that are now in force. And anytime you deviate from science and engineering and you inject politics into building codes, I think Mike will tell you, as a former code official himself for a large jurisdiction in Florida, doesn't work out very well. But those contour lines have played out pretty well. And I think they've become more sophisticated. The problem is, even with those contour maps, we don't always know exactly how it's being enforced. And we don't seem able, given what happened last year, to keep the politics out of the I don't know, Mike, if you wanted to chime in on that anymore.
Yeah, absolutely, Leslie. One of the things, like Leslie mentioned, is when we had the option of partially enclosed, the internal pressurization. One of the things I saw as a code official in Hillsborough County oftentimes is, homeowners didn't know what that meant. Homeowners, by some way, the homeowners got to believe that made it like a hurricane-proof home. And, people were hearing terms like, well, yeah, your house could withstand a hurricane and the roof would still be on it. But what they didn't realize is that meant for the loss of the windows, loss of the doors, and basically the home being wrecked on the inside, but the roof still being on. Well, that doesn't really qualify as your house withstanding the storm. Structurally, it still may be there, but it's not livable. So I think some of the things Leslie mentioned are, exactly what we're looking at, especially when you go forward with the code, is what is going to be useful and what is going to be helpful for, the home building industry to be able to meet that code, yet also homeowners know that they're getting something that's, going to provide them with a measure of safety down the road.
See, this doesn't seem at all logical to me, this whole thing about having a different building code on the Eastern Panhandle than on the Western Panhandle, because you can understand meteorologically, and Bill, think about this, Jacksonville, in the Jacksonville area, Jacksonville kind of recedes back. You understand why there aren't as many hurricanes that hit Jacksonville. But the hurricanes that come from the south want to bend to the right. Okay, we haven't had that many, in the record book, a half a dozen or so in the Eastern Panhandle, but you don't intuitively think that the Eastern Panhandle would necessarily have fewer storms than the Western Panhandle. Why would that be, or am I missing something?
Brian, I got to tell you, I think there's one word that we should apply to everything that's been done up to this point on the codes and the approach. It's too surgical, and we're parsing our safety away. I think rethink is the word that I would use. Let's rethink this whole approach. I'm like you, pretty fed up with always looking back and thinking we can predict exactly, okay, we need it here, we don't need it there. I can explain to you why it's been done, the way it's been done in the past, and everything else that goes with it. But in the end, until we can 100% predict weather, we have no business rolling the dice in how we build and where we build. And I think that, we have so many problems with codes. One of them is a lack of transparency because they're very technical. We're working very hard to change that. We're going to look forward to coming back and sharing with you the findings we've got from a study we've conducted over the past year to prove what we've always known. People, consumers, homeowners, home buyers are not worried about codes because they assume that they're already handled. They assume that no one would be allowed to build a building without using at least solid minimum safety standards. And when you inform that consumer that they're wrong, and that trust is possibly misplaced, they become furious. So we think that the whole formula needs to be disrupted, that consumer transparency needs to take over. In fact, we've tested this whole notion, and the slogan of this campaign is going to be no code, no confidence. We can't say that your house is built poorly if it wasn't a building code used to build it. But what we can say is we have no idea. And the only way we're going to learn is when something tragic happens. And that's the wrong way to test and verify our homes. So we need to rethink the whole thing. I'm glad that more and more people are recognizing that. You have long advocated for that. And I think that the time is.
One of the things I noticed was that in Mexico Beach, a lot of the buildings there, a lot of the homes were basically ramblers or ranch house styles, single floor slabs. And so what I'm thinking is this would be a good opportunity to do what they did in Greensburg, Kansas, after Greensburg was wiped out. Go back in, rebuild it above code so that the next time this does happen, it might be 50 years from now. And some of these houses you're seeing there, they were built in the 60s. Right. So they can go back in there, rebuild it, and make an example of what to do, not what not to do.
I couldn't agree more. There's a house, a colleague of ours from one of our partner organizations had a house in Mexico Beach. It's not the one featured today in the Times. It's not quite that large, but her house survived because she followed the Insurance Institute Fortified program, which is what they call beyond code, or what Mike might call code future practices. All the stuff we thought about in 1992 leading up to 2001, we were accused of, being too pie in the sky and it's overkill. Those things that are in that code are now like yesterday, right? No one's fighting about it. It's obsolete. So I think you're absolutely right. We have an opportunity in the Panhandle to show that we can do it affordably, brilliantly, and in a way that's durable. And then when you do things, we built a house this past couple of years in Breezy Point after Sandy. They get the everyday benefits too: energy efficiency, flood insurance discount, homeowners discount. I mean, there's a lot of things that, when the skies are blue, you get the benefits from that well-built home too. But I think we're going to be calling for, and what I'm hearing and seeing is a real sincere interest in a real change in how we build. The first thing we have to do, though, guys, is we have to fix what they broke last year in Florida and reverse that bad law.
So Mike, what does it take to go back and build a house to future code for a homeowner in these areas that have been affected and had their house destroyed? How much more will it cost, and will insurance pay the difference?
Well, I think one of the things to look at, Bill, is, like the comment was made that many of the homes that were destroyed were ranch slab on grade. If they exist in the velocity zone, or if we know that the elevation, the required flood elevation, they may be required to be elevated homes. So that's going to add some cost to them. But then the benefit is going to be they're going to have reduced flood insurance, and obviously the concept that they're going to be there in a future storm event, with better longevity than they may have had now. And one of the other things I'd like to comment on is many times what I think we see, and at least as a code official, I've seen this, is we like to classify things exactly on human-made lines on nature. So we'll say, well, this road is the windborne debris region. On the other side of this road, that's not the windborne debris region. But we need to remind people that, Mother Nature is not going to stop the wind right in the middle of that highway. So across that area, they still may want to use shutters. They still may want to use impact glass. They still may want to take measurements, even if they're, quote, outside of the special flood hazard area, still take measurements to protect their home from any potential flooding. And, one of the things we always tell people is, because one of the contradictions, or I should say the oppositions to code, people always say, well, a code compliant house is going to cost more. And yes, it's going to, but that cost may not be all that much when you look at the big picture for the longevity of the home, the survivability of the home. And, you may have minor damage, but after a storm event, you have a home to go back to. So even if you're out of it, for a couple of days during the evacuation time or what have you, at least when you go back, the home is still going to be there.
So Brett Adair, what percentage of homes in Mexico Beach would you estimate were totally destroyed by the hurricane?
Totally destroyed, I would say, I'd have to say at least 50. The problem with that, though, is the damage is so sufficient from wind and surge. You had both elements there. I find it really hard, other than the one home that's been featured, to find any that may not have to be completely leveled down, because I had a great discussion, a little bit of banter with Tim Marshall earlier, as we all know Tim, and his take is those elevated homes would be the best way, obviously, with some sufficient piling, but or either just don't allow those homes to be built, businesses on that beach side of 98. It just makes perfect sense. And, the more strict codes in that area, again, it's going to save money over time. You may have to spend a little bit more, but the next category 3, 4, 5 hurricane, those additional codes may save you completely from having nearly any damage. So, why not go ahead and implement that into the system? And one other thing that I noticed this evening, with the more minor damaged areas to the west on Panama City into the proper area of Panama City Beach, code enforcement is out, checking everything, making sure that for the contractors that are coming in already to do this storm damage assessment cleanup, that these guys are licensed, bonded, and insured, so that we don't have the shady contractor issues going on. So those guys are already on the ground doing their job, and I expect to see more of that, unfortunately.
So, Mike, what does it take percentage-wise to build your house to a sufficient level that it's going to be protected for the most part to future code? What's the percentage?
I don't know. I guess a rough estimate would be between 5 and 7. If you're talking about something that's, the idea of going to code or, a little bit above. I use the example of metal connectors, Simpson connectors often, per connector, those are incredibly cheap. They're like $1, $1.50. You might need a couple hundred on your whole home. But look at the amount of value that they give you for strength, per component. And yet that's something that it can be installed at any time, but when the house is being built or remodeled, that's the time to do it, because, a retrofit later is incredibly difficult. So, when you look at every one of those little things, upgrading the roof, you're going to have to put a roof on it anyway, but maybe you spend a little bit more for the secondary water barrier, a little bit more for a higher class of shingle. Every one of those little things adds up in the big picture. Your house is always only as strong as its weakest link. So every little measure that you can take, it does add a little bit of cost, but as we said before, that cost is beneficial down the road. The garage door, for example, having an impact rated, wind rated garage door, it's going to cost you a little bit more. But boy, there's a lot of peace of mind knowing that all I got to do is push that door opener button, the garage door goes down and it's protected. I don't have to shutter it. I don't have to put any braces on it. One click of the button and the garage door is down and you're good to go. So, a lot of it, and maybe that's what we need to do. We need to share with people the convenience factor too for a lot of things.
Bill, here in South Florida, they use a number of 10 to 20%, but most of that comes into how you protect the windows, the entry doors, and the garage door, and especially the windows, because if you put in impact windows, that's a lot more expensive. If you put in, generally what comes with the house is basic shutters you have to manually put up. If you put roll down shutters in, or you put some kind of accordion shutters or some other kind of more sophisticated shutters, they're pretty expensive. And depending on the value of your house, if your house is, a few $100,000, $300,000 or $400,000, you can easily put $30,000 or $40,000 worth of shutters and fancy windows on a house. So in that price range, it can add up to that 10 or 20%. But I'll tell you a little story and how it's evolved here in South Florida. In 1994, in the fall of '94, when the post-Andrew building code was about to go into effect, you would hear spots on the radio for home developments that said, "Beat the code, buy now, beat the code." And well, now as it's evolved, and it's not just in 2018, it's been this way for a long time. I mean, people here are very conscious of the fact that their homes are built like bunkers, and they ask those questions when they're buying homes. If they're from South Florida, they know they're sophisticated about that, but they're also driven by the fact that it lowers the insurance bill drastically, and insurance costs a fortune here. both flood insurance and homeowners insurance and windstorm insurance costs a freaking fortune. I mean, before Andrew, I had a very nice house in Coconut Grove, and I paid in the hundreds of dollars for total homeowners insurance. It would now cost $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 a year to insure that same house. So it's a drastically different thing. And if you have all that protection, you can lower it significantly. It's still ghastly expensive by all kinds of, by any kind of rational standards for most places. But you can lower it dramatically. And that has driven a lot of people to pay attention to this issue.
If I could add to that, Brian, one of the things that Brian said, and Leslie mentioned it as well, some of the things are the secondary benefits of many of these items too. Say, for example, impact glass. When you just sit down on paper, yes, impact rated windows are far more expensive than traditional windows. But then when people recognize, especially if we have transient residents, they're the so-called snowbirds that live somewhere else. They don't have to worry about protecting their home. That glass is protected 24/7, 365. And then when people talk about the added benefits for security, sound attenuation, energy efficiency, I think maybe that's what we all need to look at. In a previous life, I was a code official, but I've also been a contractor. So I think it's sharing that information. Like Brian said, there's secondary benefits to a lot of this where, you'll save some money on your insurance, you increase the value of the home. Hey, your home may be more secure. If you live near the railroad tracks or a school or what have you, a highway, it may be more quiet inside. So, I think one of the messages is not just telling people, hey, it's the code, you have to do this. There are other benefits that you can enjoy by doing some of these things.
That's a very good point.
So I have a question. What's the next step? What do we do? Do we write a strongly worded letter to Congress? Do we rally lawmakers? What's the next step?
I'll start the answer to that. Well, the Congress just did something, as I mentioned before, the Reform Recovery Act. So they are starting to get it. And the reason is because last year we topped $300 billion in losses. I mean, money talks, they're listening and they realize, but where it has to happen now is it has to make it down to the state and local governments. And in that DRRA law, it's a basket of carrots and sticks, right? So take Texas last year. Mike was talking about statewide building codes. They don't have one, okay? So they missed out on a 5% of $1 billion worth of relief because they don't get that carrot, right? So instead of collectively saying, gosh, Texas, we need to be responsible and enact a statewide code, we're going to get that reward in the future, but we're also going to protect our citizens. Unfortunately, guess what they did? They tried to change the new law before it passed to take away the requirement that you have the statewide code. So I think we have to be transparent. We have to we need to make it not so technical, and we need to help people connect the dots between these codes and the survival and comfort of their family. I don't think we're going to win until we have the consumers and voters behind us, because we cannot count on that local interest not being somewhat distracted, let's say, by development and other things. I have nothing against development if it's responsible and in the right places, and I'm a free market kind of person. But this isn't solved by free market because the consumer is not present at the time of the building code and when the decision is made on how to build something. So we have to communicate it, keep the drumbeat going, and then we have to look at our local and state officials and hold them accountable. One of the biggest hoots for me today is a bunch of people sent me an article where the person who sponsored and spearheaded the law last year to undo our wonderful mandatory update system in Florida is in an article quoted as saying how important strong codes are. I'd like to think that that means that he's had a change of heart, okay? And I'm going to reach out to him and ask him. There has to be accountability, that we have to connect these dots. Elected officials can't hurt the code in Memphis, a big seismic zone, or downgrade the code in Florida, or ignore the wildfire codes in California. It's not just a Florida, it's not a Southern thing, it's not a DNR thing, it's an everybody thing. we aren't getting all the way out to the communities where these codes matter, and we have to start connecting the dots. I wanted to say something about, all these benefits of codes. It's not just the physical losses, the financial losses, it's a lifestyle loss. I mean, my other home is in Tallahassee, where we've had Hermine come, Irma threaten, and now this. And because I have a home, of course, I have to walk the talk. I have a tornado safe room in my home, and I'm not in a flood zone. So we are on the receiving end of my nieces that are at FSU and their roommates and others. And I have to tell you that the only thing that makes us comfortable with taking people in the storm is we've taken those steps to be safe. And it takes that nervousness and anxiety, and it pushes it way down. I think that's another thing we need to convey to people, how much more confident they'll be, comfortable, and just the whole lifestyle piece, that, downsizing that disruption and finding a way to explain that to people on TV right now and the suffering. I think a lot of people are saying, going back, I would do everything differently. So I guess in the end, it's up to us to communicate, hold people accountable, and then try to help people see that this is not necessary for them to be a victim. They can take charge. So that's, my soapbox.
Well, as long as there are politicians and powerful lobbying groups, I'm afraid we're going to be fighting this fight for a long time. Unfortunately, I don't know if it was misguided or.
Bill, you're muted.
I think James muted me. He must not have liked what I was saying.
I was trying to kill some noise here. I'm thinking, oh, wrong channel.
Yeah. But I heard Marco Rubio on Meet the Press on Sunday with Chuck Todd. And there was a question earlier about immediate response and was there good federal response into the disaster zone. And he said on Meet the Press that no one from Florida had asked for help and that the state had to ask for help first. Is he just wrong, or is that just misinformed, or what is that about?
Well, that's true. Technically, the states have got to ask for FEMA to come. And if you listen to Administrator Long, the first thing he says in every interview is he reminds us how the system works. Mm-hmm. He is there to backstop that governor and that state plan. So they do have to initiate the request, but I thought I saw the request go out before landfall.
Surely.
Declaration. So I think there's some pretty good coordination there, but there are probably, it's fair to say, there are very unreal expectations of FEMA and unfair expectations. They cannot ride in on the white charger, and he's been trying to make that point. You have to have a certain level of ownership, of preparation and responsibility. I like the way that Craig Fugate used to always point out that if you have the ability and the means to be ready, you need to do that so you can get out of the way and let FEMA and the states help the people who can't help themselves. So someone asked me today about that in a different setting, and I said, it's also cultural. In our country, if you have a house fire, we have a victim mentality, and we say, wow, what happened to you? In other countries like Japan, if you have a house fire, the question you get is, what did you do? Because they understand in many cases, if there's a house fire, it's probably because of something you were cooking, right? So we have to stop thinking, not build well. When the leaders don't make the right decisions, they don't adopt the building code. In recent years, we've seen cases where they suspend the code after a tornado, for example, because they don't want it to be unduly, burdensome. And we saw the same thing after the flooding in Louisiana in 2016. They suspended the flood elevation requirements in the code because they thought they were a burden, even though they got billions of dollars in relief to lift up the homes. So we got to invert that, because that's nonsense. And then as individuals, people need to understand it's not impossible to be ready. And you can do meaningful things like evacuate. I mean, I'm embarrassed to tell you that people that I know in Tallahassee, I know one person in particular who I had quite the text message exchange with, went to Destin because he had never seen a hurricane come in. So he went into a mandatory evacuation area and stayed there. And he's just lucky that, you know, he wasn't harmed because of where the storm ended up going. But that is what's wrong. That's part of it, that kind of decision making. And FEMA cannot fix that, although they're calling for a culture of preparedness. They're right. We need one, and we need to just take the victim piece out of it, except for people who are truly victims. If you can help yourself before the storm, you have a responsibility to do that.
Bill, I think one of the questions that's unanswered with this storm so far is one of the lessons that we learned in Andrew and then we relearned it in Katrina is that when you have an extreme event that just goes beyond the ability of the state, or in the case of Puerto Rico, the territory, to deal with, even with FEMA's help, all the help they have available, that you need the military. It's the only entity in our society that comes with mobility and communications and housing and food. It all comes at one time, right? And we found that that's the only thing that saved people in Hurricane Andrew. Obviously, that's what happened to Katrina. Obviously, a tiny version of that happened given the magnitude of what happened in Puerto Rico for whatever reason, which I've never understood why they didn't deploy a greater military presence in Puerto Rico. And I don't know enough about this to know how able the FEMA response is and whether it just exceeds FEMA's capabilities or not, because there are people that are just barely able to communicate even today. They can get some texts out today, and this is the first time they've been able to even communicate, to even begin a process. And then you hear about these people inland that are living, very relatively poor people living in rural areas with no power, no communications, no transportation, trees down. It feels overwhelming to me that I don't know how you solve this without some help from the military, if not substantial help.
Well, I think that's where the National Guard or the Florida the Guard called in by the governor, and they activated 1,200 beforehand. But remember, FEMA is the backstop.
Right.
They're the coordinator of all the federal agencies to be the backstop. It's the state that leads the response, and that's where, if you follow the lines back to how these things go, it's about timing, speed, efficiency, and then frankly, in some cases, they bring things like Puerto Rico was a distribution problem. The stuff was there. If mountain roadways are not passable, they're not passable initially. So it's. I think you're right about the military, but that's what the Florida Guard is there to do, and that's what they're doing right now.
Yeah, the question is whether the Florida Guard is enough, and it may very well be in this case. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying that was to me the number one takeaway from Andrew was that when that extreme event happens, you have anarchy until the military was able to come and restore order. Now, it's a different situation in Panama City. It wasn't this complete obliteration of government that happened in South Dade and happened in New Orleans. It wasn't just a complete, elimination of any sort of structure and order. So it may not be necessary. I'm just saying that was a lesson from Andrew and Katrina.
Well, you said a lot of smart things, Brian Norcross. You always do. Give us a takeaway, something we don't know about this storm as we get ready to wrap up after a long night here. Well,
it might turn out to be a Category 5 in the end. I think that there's evidence that it was stronger than indicated. The pressure being as low as it was a bigger storm than Andrew, and the pressure was a little bit lower. So I think there's evidence there. And then the storm surge question is the real open question. Was the storm surge 14 or 15 feet, or was it 20 feet? If it was 20 feet, unless there's something flawed in the modeling, then the winds had to be stronger than the measurements at the time.
Wow, that's a great takeaway. Thank you, Brian. Bill Reed, what can you add to all this conversation? You always add so much.
Well, you may have been talking about this beforehand, but this has to be one of the most thoroughly observed from development, initial development, right through landfall. I've never seen so much recon thrown at a storm in my career. I think we're going to see some unbelievably good science come out of this relative to the hurricane. I know we didn't catch the upper limit of what it got to, but the hurricane models, the three of them that are specifically designed for forecasting hurricanes, are doing things now on forecasting intensity that weren't possible just 6 years ago when I retired. So we're making some headway. That Hurricane Forecast Improvement Project has been making some headway on cracking the code on what makes these things go ballistic, or in the case of Florence, drop back down. And we may not catch it absolutely, but we're catching the trends.
That's outstanding. Thank you, Bill. Brett Adair, we're just glad you're here. Make sure you get unmuted. Any other experiences, stories that you're going to take away from the storm that you haven't shared so far tonight?
Yeah, Bill. I mean, there's tons of different stories and things from when we came out of that house in Beacon Hill and emerged and went looking through the other houses that were around us, and seeing all the people walking out of those homes, surprisingly, mostly unscathed other than a cut or a bruise. But one of the things about the storm and the forecast and the intensity that really struck me, we had the question of the trough and the shear as it approached the coastline, but this hurricane was analyzed so well by the aircraft recon. And what I'll remember is, everybody's kind of talked a little bit about sea surface temperatures being in the 29-degree range in the path, but the depth of that 26 degrees Celsius with those bathymetric readings from the drop thons, those depths of well over 100 feet deep, that told me that, I don't see anything to weaken it from a sea surface aspect, because with the speed it was moving, it didn't have time to upwell. So personally, I thought it was all systems go until it hit land friction. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Well, I know a lot of prayers were set up for you as you were going through your experiences, Brett, and we're just glad you're here tonight in one piece.
I appreciate it very much, guys.
And thank you for being here tonight. Doug Kiesling, when I saw you standing in the middle of the eye, I wasn't surprised, but to learn how you got there was quite harrowing.
Yeah, it was intense. One of the freakier parts of the storm was after the storm, after I helped that couple get into the condo and take shelter, I'm walking around the west side of Mexico Beach. I did not see another soul around for at least 90 minutes to 2 hours. And trying to get, communications out to, texting, producers and saying, hey, this is what's happening, send help. And they're like, there's nothing we could do. And it's just that eerie of walking around, seeing everything destroyed, all these older houses, all you see is just rubble and concrete slabs. And the first thing I could think of was Tim Marshall couldn't make it down, so take lots of photos for him, because he's going to want to look at all the stuff for the damage and how it went where and what was damaged in a certain way. Buildings, there's condos or townhouses that are up on stilts that are actually collapsed in on themselves. It's just, the devastation was amazing. One of the other things I'm really curious about is where that's, the final surge line is. Because like I said, I went to the end of the eye to take shelter, then worked my way back down 98, just kind of following the surge as it receded to get back into Mexico Beach. But the one big question I have is, what is up with the cell communication? Because I was getting the emergency alerts, boil water alerts and everything, but we couldn't get a cell signal out. But yet I was still getting emergency alerts.
Yeah,
you have the problem still. You have AT&T has data and signal down in those regions, limited albeit, but the other cellular providers are still out, not working.
But they're saying that they're out, but yet I'm on Verizon and I had a backup phone with T-Mobile. I'm getting the alerts from the emergency alerts. I'm getting that stuff, but they're saying there's no signals. But how am I getting the signal? That's the one question I have is, did they shut things down? Or what was going on with that? Because if they weren't working, how was I getting all these alerts?
I think the answer is related to, and I'm not an expert in this, but I did some work at one time, is these things called broadcast alerts. So it's a one-way signal. And something tells me that in order to be sure that everybody gets them, somehow the radio in your phone picks up things that are not related necessarily to your carrier and the cellular band, right?
Okay.
So I think it's got to do with that. And I read where the Verizon problem is not that their cell towers all failed so much as their fiber is broken in multiple places. And the cell towers are connected by fiber. So that's it's a multifaceted problem.
Well, the ham radio studying starts later this week.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for being here, Doug. We're so glad you're safe and sound.
Thanks. Take care.
Leslie, add to the conversation. You already have given so much, but what's the other takeaway we've missed so far?
It's the program we started 2 years ago with FEMA, NOAA, and the Weather Channel. We've got to get hurricane strong. We got to talk about this stuff during the blue sky times. We got to get people comfortable with their role, whether they're an elected official adopting a code or it's a family getting prepared. We need to just get rid of this idea that someone is going to come and save them, because that's not possible. We would if we could. It's just not possible. So we need to I really, really appreciate Administrator Long and Administrator Fugate before him and their willingness to be candid about the limitations of government in this, and reminding people about the limitations of the amount of money available if you don't buy flood insurance and the limited loans available. We need to paint the picture that the time to get prepared is ahead of time so that you can be comfortable and survive. And I think that, the old way of, coming in and pretending that we can solve all the problems, it's never going to be possible. There will never be enough resources to do that. So I'm hoping that people are paying attention. We need to take advantage of our academic partners, like Wharton and the great, if you haven't read The Ostrich Paradox and all the great descriptor of all the human biases that get in between us and the right behaviors in storms and disasters, I highly recommend it. We've actually written about it. It's time for a change. I think this might be the one that gets us there. And if it doesn't, I might just go crazy.
It does feel that way. This one does feel different, Leslie. I hope we're right. So thank you for being here tonight. And thank you for inviting Mike. Mike, thank you for your contribution to the show tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
And any other last minute takeaways before we hand it back to James, because he may ask a couple of questions, even though he'll turn into a TV pumpkin here at 10 o'clock.
Sure. I'll just add one thing real quick, Bill. Every time we have a disaster, everybody talks about building codes and they think that, that's all that the code focuses on. But I think one of the big things that folks need to remember is the code protects us in blue sky times as well. It keeps us from getting electrocuted in our homes. It keeps us from falling down the stairs. It ensures that we have safe water to drink and plumbing systems work properly. So, when we're getting the message out to the general public, to the citizenry, it's one of those that, we just don't worry about the code to protect us from disasters. The code keeps us safe on a day-to-day basis, even on blue skies and sunshiny days.
Absolutely. Dr. Spann, you've been mighty quiet.
Yeah, I've been fascinated by this, but I have got to go back and do some television. So thanks to all of our guests. Great show. I'm going to go back and listen to this driving to schools this week. This was a long show, but a good show and a necessary show. So thanks, everybody. And before what I'm going to do here, Bill, I'm going to roll Tony's astronomy report. And I'm going to go do television and let you wrap it up. So we'll take a quick break for Tony Rice, and we will wrap things up right after this. Don't go away.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
This week offers the best opportunity to see the zodiacal light. This has nothing to do with fortune telling. It's a hazy pyramid of light, sometimes called false dawn. It's best seen around the equinoxes on a moonless morning. It's also the largest feature in our solar system that can be seen with the naked eye. But few people have seen it, or have they? You may have seen it driving on a lonely country road, thinking it was light pollution from a town over the horizon. But it's actually coming from much further away. Zodiacal light comes from sunlight, reflecting off of particles of dust and ice throughout the inner solar system. That dust comes from passing comets, asteroid collisions, as well as some leftovers from the formation of the solar system itself. Jupiter's gravity helps pull all that dust into concentrations along its orbit. Viewed from Earth, that plane runs through the constellations of the zodiac, thus the zodiacal lights. The zodiacal light is actually there year-round, but outside of a few weeks around the equinox, it's tipped on its side and lost in the glow of the horizon, or the Milky Way. But through October 23rd, moonless pre-dawn skies give you the chance to see this phenomenon. It's best to look around an hour before sunrise, looking towards the east for a faint cone-shaped glow pointing up from the horizon. It's fainter than the Milky Way, so you'll need to be pretty far away from city lights. You might just see some leftovers of Halley's Comet as well. The Orion meteor shower is underway, peaking later this weekend, October 21st into the 22nd. The Orionids get their name from the direction they appear to radiate from, near the constellation Orion the Hunter. Best viewing will be in that same hour before sunrise. That's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
Thank you, Tony Rice. That was a fantastic addition to the show tonight. An amazing, overwhelming week. Just something that we'll never forget. That day, I was lucky enough to get to be forecasting that day because that was an event that I would not have wanted to miss, one that I wish that hadn't happened. But it felt important to be getting that message out. So I think James has muted everybody else on the planet here. So if you have anything last minute you want to say unmute thyself. Doug, he's got his hand raised. Unmute yourself, Doug.
Well, one of the things that everyone was worried about, after the storm was, what happened? Where was I? So tomorrow, we recorded everything in HD from the live cameras in the vehicle. So tomorrow night, 5 Central, we're just going to restream everything from the point of just passing through Tinsdale Air Force Base to the aftermath right up towards sunset. So it'll be about a 5-hour, won't be any voiceovers. It'll just be the raw feed from everything. So if you guys want to see what exactly happened, ground zero before everybody converged on the town, we'll be showing exactly that, and how I had to go from just kind of leapfrogging from the surge to the surge line to the surge line, keep moving to the southeast to get back into town.
So where can they find that, Doug?
That'll be just on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/BNVN1.
And it'll be recorded so it can be watched later if you can't see it live.
So you can watch it again later.
Outstanding. Brett, anything, any of your video or anything people need to be able to go find?
Yeah, Bill, we obviously all the surge stuff, and then after the surge, before we had real TFR issues, we took up a helicopter, flew over Tyndall and Mexico Beach, and some of that incredible stuff. YouTube.com, looked Live Storms Media, and it's tons of video there, tons of content.
Awesome. Thank you, Brett. I know you're tired. You need to get in a good warm bed tonight and get a good night's sleep. Leslie, Mike, I know the big conference is coming up. I don't think I'm going to get to come. I'm sorry I'm going to miss that. But I know you'll have a lot of great things. How can people learn about it and be there? And Leslie, unmute yourself. Yeah, there you go.
Go to National Disaster Resilience Conference.org or flash.org. And you can email me, Leslie, at flash.org, and we'll get you there. We have some exciting announcements coming up about some exciting additional keynoters, and we'll get you added to the list and see all that too.
Outstanding. Thank you for staying up late with us tonight. And, we'll look forward to hearing from you guys real soon. Brian Norcross, always great to talk to you. Make sure you unmute yourself for a second. Say goodbye here.
Okay. I wanted to ask you a question, actually, Bill. You said you were around for Eloise in '75.
I was 13 years old, and
that has not been reanalyzed. So if you look at the what we know about it, because we only have every I don't know, 6 or 12 hours or whatever, 6 hours, I think. But it looks like, from what I see, that it came ashore at essentially full intensity. It did not weaken right at the coast. Do you remember how that transpired and how that came to pass?
Well, the storm was on the northern Yucatan, and Bill may know. He may know more specifics because I was literally following every advisory, any way I could get it in 1975, which was not easy. But that storm turned sharply northeast. We thought it was going to go like into Mobile, Alabama. And on that last night, which was the night that President Ford, there was an assassination attempt on his life. And, that sort of distracted some of the news, but that storm turned northeast. And, I was, as a 13-year-old, sort of disappointed that it wasn't coming more toward Birmingham. But, it did eventually move inland, and come more straight north. And we had a lot of weather from it. But I remember believing and hearing that approaching trough, helped that storm to intensify in those last few hours before it made landfall. And that always struck me as something to remember.
But there is that meme about storms always weaken before they come ashore in the northern Gulf of Mexico. And I'm just saying, and maybe, Bill, do you remember by any chance what it says in the record is that the peak intensity was right before landfall. It doesn't give us a landfall intensity, because they haven't reanalyzed it yet. But
I think there was someone in a car and had an aneroid barometer at Niceville or somewhere. I think it read 955 millibars or something like that. It's what the Monthly Weather Review article may have said, but I'm speaking from memory. So
955. That's very good, Bill. 955 is what's in the record. Yeah.
That always struck me because those Monthly Weather Review articles were so important as a kid. I'd spend Saturdays at the Weather Service, reading this information, and it was amazing. But and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the fog of the battle, I think I remember the barometer at Tyndall read 980. Right before landfall, and thinking 919 millibars in the center, that was 60 millibars of gradient. And it spoke to what Brett was talking about earlier. That intense gradient was amazing. And I may be off by some amount of millibars. Someone can correct me down the road, but how does that compare, Brian, Bill Reed, to other storms that you've seen in the past? 60 millibars over 20 or 25 miles.
I think we probably saw some of that with, maybe even tighter with Maria when it did the pinhole eye and spun up before hitting Dominica last year. So if the really deep ones like that, I think that's probably the norm rather than the exception. When you get the big, large typhoons, for example, with the fat tire thing, maybe the gradient isn't quite as tight as that. It's spread out over a little bit bigger area, but there's variability in that.
Yeah, if you remember, this one never went through an eyewall replacement cycle.
Right.
So once it does that, it tends to spread that energy out. So the energy, it acted like it was going to do it right before landfall, and it never did it. So it never got that redistribution of the energy of the storm related to the low pressure.
Well, I know when I woke up at 4 a.m. and went immediately to the satellite and, the imagery and saw the donut of lightning around the center, from the lightning detection networks, I knew we were in trouble. I had already known that from the night before, but I was hoping we would get up and have this meme, as you refer to, Brian, occurring. But that's when I knew it was time to get on the high horse because there was only a little bit of time left. What was the last time, Brett and Doug, that people could have gotten out of Mexico Beach safely and gotten to a good location? What time?
I saw when I was at the I believe it was a hotel. I actually saw people who were evacuating within a half hour beforehand. And unfortunately, I saw them going to the southeast. So I don't know if they made it out, surge hit them, or what. But it was like a family of like 4 people that left. And you had basically a half hour before the eye hit. That was it. If you weren't out of there by then, you were committed.
Yeah, because probably as many trees as there are along that road, too. When was 98 eventually blocked by falling trees?
They were coming down as I was actually going to the southeast, going into Mexico Beach. So you're talking at 10:30 in the morning. You have large tree branches and trees, coming down along Tinsdale there. So it was just a matter of just trying to get in there and beat the trees coming down. But fortunately, the trees were far enough back that it wasn't that big of a hazard along 98. Yes, there were still some trees that did come down and block it, but it wasn't the complete, zipper effect, as I like to call it, of trees down every 5 feet.
Good.
Yeah, that's correct. I think the reason you may have seen them go more southeast on 98 toward Port St. Joe is there was less tree contention on a longer stretch. You had going west of Mexico, you had the big trees down Tyndall, like Doug was speaking on, and then the only road out north, Hitchcock, 386, and that was an absolute disaster. Anybody that would have made their way up there, once the winds picked up strong enough, I mean, they would have been crushed by trees. It was blocked for, hour and a half prior. You still had time just because it was such a tight wind gradient.
Well, I don't envy you guys. I appreciate what you do, but I couldn't do it. Well, I think it's time to call this show a wrap, ladies and gentlemen. This is WeatherBrains, the weekly netcast. It's all about weather. We've been doing it for 13 years now. Hard to believe. We did it during Katrina. We've done it in a lot of bad storms, but this is going to be one for the record books here in a lot of ways. So until next Monday night, when we'll convene this large, august group with Ken Graham, the director of the National Hurricane Center, and have another conversation about this memorable hurricane. I'm Bill Murray for the whole WeatherBrains group. I hope you have a great week. And as I always remind you, keep an eye to the sky because you're always bound to be looking at something interesting. Have a great week. Bye, Leslie. Bye, everybody. Bye, Doug. Bye, Brett. Bye, Bill. Bye, Brian. Bye, Mike. Bye, Avatar of James.
Bye, Bill.
See you, Bill.
See y'all.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys for listening and watching. Really, really good show. Want to go back and listen to the whole thing again driving around this week. But thanks to all of our guests. Thanks to you. We typically do this Monday nights at 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central. Back on regular time next week. We'll see you all then. Thanks for watching. Have a great week and God bless.